Chapter 1168. After listening to Knight Serenity's explanation, Qinchuan had a clearer understanding of the importance of the power of law to body integration stage cultivators. This was like participating in a job. Knight Serenity, who chose to fuse with the law of fire, was like a small business owner who started his own business. Perhaps there were many competitors in the field of law who wanted to swallow each other up, but Knight Serenity might not necessarily have no chance of becoming the leader. Choosing to fuse with a law that had already reached the pinnacle was like choosing a franchise store. Although you were the manager in name, there was a higher headquarters above you. All the things you sold in the store came from the headquarters. If the headquarters cut off your goods one day, then you could just wait to go bankrupt. However, this was only the worst-case scenario. Generally speaking, as long as the franchise store didn't cause trouble, there wouldn't be any problems. However, it was basically impossible to become the leader and replace the headquarters. As for body integration stage cultivators who didn't fuse with the power of law, although they were small business owners who started their own businesses, they didn't have a clear goal and were still in the exploration stage. Their overall situation was slightly better than Dongshu stage cultivators who weren't qualified to open a store, but there was a limit to it. Simply speaking, they were inferior to the top, but superior to the bottom. Qinchuan's current situation was like a person who had a huge sum of money in his hands and was ready to open a store. However, he hadn't decided which line of business he wanted to go into yet. After thinking for a while, Qinchuan asked Argentin, "What kind of law did you fuse with?" Argentin replied, "Silver light. It's considered the law of light. Similarly, there is no pinnacle existence in this law domain." Upon hearing this, Qinchuan asked curiously, "Then how do I know if there is a pinnacle existence in the law domain I want to fuse with?" Hearing Qinchuan's question, Argentin replied, "As far as I know, there are very few pinnacle existences in the universe. What I can be sure of is that there are pinnacle existences in every ancient powerful race that has existed until now. Furthermore, the law domains that the supreme existences of the ancient races control aren't a secret. As long as you avoid these law domains, you basically won't run into any supreme existences." Qinchuan nodded gently and asked, "I know that the only true god of the Protoss, Atheus, controls the power of will. Perhaps it should be called the law of wishes? The Tian people, on the other hand, controlled the power of oaths. What kind of power did the other ancient races possess?" Argentin replied, "The ultimate existence of the Voidwalkers is called the Voidwalkers, and they control the law of void. The ultimate existence of the demons is called the Demon Emperor, and they control the law of evil. The ultimate existence of Zerg should be the legendary Zerg Queen, and they control the law of desire." Hearing Argentin's answer, Qinchuan frowned slightly and asked, "Apart from these, are there any supreme existences in other law domains?" Argentin shook his head and replied, "At least from the current situation, there aren't any." Argentin said no, but Qinchuan knew that the human emperor, the person called you, was still alive. The law of time was still under his control. However, Qinchuan didn't say these things. Moreover, he didn't intend to fuse with the law of time, because he didn't comprehend the law of time at all. If Qinchuan had to choose, he would definitely choose to fuse with the law of thunder. What about the Void Empire? What about them? Qinchuan was a little curious and asked, "Are they like us, and need to fuse with the law of time to advance to the third stage?" Hearing Qinchuan's question, Argentin replied, "As far as I know, the Void Empire and the Void Empire have some connections. They should be of the same race, and the Void Spirit should be their common supreme existence. In the Void Empire, there are only void creatures, and what they fuse with should be the law of void." Qinchuan nodded and said, "So, if you want to become a real overlord at the combination stage, you have to fuse all the power and the law of time into one, right?" Argentin nodded and said to Qinchuan, "But you can put aside the matter of fusing with the law of time for the time being. Think about how to fuse with the other powers first. Qinchuan nodded and said to Knight Serenity and Argenton, "Thank you for answering my questions." After sending off Knight Serenity and Argenton, Qinchuan looked at Lu Zi, who was sitting beside him, and asked, "How do you feel now?" Lu Zi smiled and said to Qinchuan, "Of course I want to fuse with the law of illusion. There are very few people in this field. Maybe I can become the supreme existence in this field." Qinchuan laughed and said, "Then I have to work hard. I don't know how many overlords at the combination stage in this universe have fused with the law of thunder, and how far they have gone." Ding dong. The doorbell of the room suddenly rang. Qinchuan subconsciously looked at the projection. When he saw Knight Serenity standing at the door, he opened the door and let Knight Serenity in. Qinchuan looked at Knight Serenity curiously and asked, "Why are you back?" Knight Serenity pursed his lips and asked Qinchuan, "Do you plan to fuse with the law of thunder?" Qinchuan nodded and said, "I do plan to do so." At this time, Qinchuan did not master many powers of law, but he was very proficient in all of them. As the law of thunder was the most suitable for him, it was naturally his first choice. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Knight Serenity looked at Qinchuan subtly and said, "Although everyone will choose one power of law as their main direction of attack when fusing with the power of law, I think you can try fusing with more power of law." Qinchuan looked at Knight Serenity curiously and asked, "Why didn't you say that just now? Why did you come here alone to talk about this?" Knight Serenity replied, "Because Argenton doesn't know that you have the true dragon bloodline. Because of the true dragon bloodline, you have a great advantage in the power of the law of space. If you fuse with the law of space when you advance to the combination stage, you have a great chance of becoming a demon emperor." The demon emperor that Knight Serenity mentioned was not the self-proclaimed demon emperor of the demon world in the land of exile, but the real demon emperor of all demons, a supreme existence. Qinchuan looked at Knight Serenity and said, "You still have something to say, right? Continue." Knight Serenity nodded and continued, "You should have known that the law of space belongs to the demon race. To be exact, it is the inherited law of the true dragon race. It may not have had any special manifestations in the past, but when you advance to the combination stage and fuse with the law of space, your advantage in this aspect will be completely highlighted. It is not an exaggeration to say that your attainments in the field of the law of space will surpass others, and your progress in the combination stage will be extremely fast. This is the advantage of the inherited law." Chapter 1169. Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Qinchuan couldn't help but fall into contemplation. Knight Serenity wouldn't lie to him. That was to say, if he really chose to integrate the law of space, he would make rapid progress in the form synthesis stage with the help of the inheritance of the real dragon bloodline. At the same time, he would have a great chance of becoming a demon emperor. Everything would be smooth sailing for him. However, all of this was just Knight Serenity's speculation. No one knew what the real situation was. However, Knight Serenity was right about one thing. If Qinchuan wanted to be stronger than others in the form synthesis stage, he had to integrate more law of space. As for biting off more than he could chew, Qinchuan didn't care about that for the time being. "Thank you for your advice." Qinchuan smiled and said to Knight Serenity, "Do you think it's more suitable for me to integrate the law of space?" Knight Serenity thought for a while and then replied, "The more, the better." Knight Serenity and Qinchuan had known each other for a long time. When Qinchuan had just awakened, he was only at the early Dongshu realm. However, in just a few years, Knight Serenity had witnessed Qinchuan's breakthrough from the early Dongshu realm to the peak of the Dongshu realm. In just a few years, Qinchuan had walked a path that others might not be able to complete in thousands of years. From this, it could be seen that Qinchuan's talent was very strong. As for Qinchuan's future, Knight Serenity certainly hoped that Qinchuan would be as strong as possible. And with Qinchuan's talent, Knight Serenity believed that Qinchuan could integrate at least 3 law of space. If Qinchuan could really integrate 3 law of space, then Qinchuan would definitely be able to maintain his strong performance in the Dongshu realm. It would still be a common thing for him to fight those at a higher realm. At this moment, Knight Serenity couldn't wait to see Qinchuan, who was only at the early Dongshu realm, challenge those at the peak of the Dongshu realm or even the peak of the Dongshu realm. Seeing that Knight Serenity was so confident in him, Qinchuan smiled and said, "I'll think about it seriously." At this point, Yiyu had nothing more to say. She turned to Qinchuan and said, "If that's the case, I'll take my leave." After Knight Serenity left, Qinchuan's eyes turned to LV and asked, "What do you think of Knight Serenity's suggestion?" LVZ thought about it seriously and replied, "To be honest, I think it makes sense. You can't be measured by common sense, so naturally, you can't be measured by common sense." Qinchuan nodded slightly and said, "Among the law of space that I've mastered, I'm only proficient in the law of thunder. Although I've dabbled in the other law of space, I only know a little about them." Hearing Qinchuan's words, LVZ suggested, "Then let's integrate the law of thunder and the law of space." Qinchuan pondered for a moment and asked LVZ, "What do you think of the law of time?" Hearing Qinchuan's words, LVZ looked at Qinchuan in surprise and said, "Are you crazy? You know that the human emperor is still alive, so why are you thinking about the law of time?" Qinchuan pursed his lips and said, "But if he's still alive, the human race will never have any hope. The only hope is to defeat him in the law domain." "You can't do that." LVZ shook her head without thinking and said, "If you really do that, do you think he'll give you a chance to grow?" LVZ was almost certain that if Qinchuan really did that, then Qinchuan would only have 2 paths to take. The first was to become a vassal of the human emperor and never be able to rise again, and the second was to be strangled in the cradle by the human emperor. LVZ had great confidence in Qinchuan, but this didn't mean that she believed that Qinchuan could challenge the human emperor when he was only at the combination stage. This was even more unreliable than striking a rock with an egg. Seeing LVZ's firm opposition, Qinchuan smiled and said to LVZ, "Don't be too nervous. I haven't even touched the surface of the law of time, so I don't have a chance to fuse it." Seeing Qinchuan smile, LVZ couldn't smile. She was really afraid that Qinchuan would do something stupid. "Don't worry, I won't take the risk." Qinchuan held LVZ's hand and said, "I won't do something stupid without being absolutely sure." LVZ nodded gently and said to Qinchuan, "If you don't want to make a decision, you must tell me." After learning more about the combination stage, Qinchuan began to try to fuse the various powers in his body. However, this wasn't something that could be done overnight. It would take time and research. Everyone's situation was different, so Qinchuan had nothing to learn. While Qinchuan was exploring his cultivation, the spaceship arrived at the Great Moon Nebula of the Holy Cluster. The Great Moon Nebula was a nebula directly under the jurisdiction of Zerg. However, the Great Moon Nebula wasn't Zerg, but Meizu. The reason Qinchuan and the others came to the Great Moon Nebula wasn't because of Kero and Bela, but because they had found out that Zerg's forces that destroyed Tron Nebula were transported back to the Sage Monarch continent, the core of the Holy Cluster, through the Great Moon Nebula. When Kero and Bela found out that Qinchuan and the others were going to the Great Moon Nebula, they had mixed feelings. They had left the Great Moon Nebula more than 100 years ago. Now that they had returned, everything had changed. LVZ found Kero and Bela and asked them gently, "Can you tell me about your past in the Great Moon Nebula?" "Qinchuan didn't ask me to ask you this. I'm just curious. Of course, you can choose not to tell me." Kero hesitated for a moment in response to LVZ's question. She then looked at Bela and asked, "Bela, what do you think?" Bela lowered her head and said softly, "It's okay." Kero turned to look at LVZ and sighed. "It's a long story. Bela and I are actually princesses of Meizu. LVZ was surprised to hear Caro's words. She didn't expect Caro and Bela's origins to be so complicated. 140 years ago, there was a turmoil in the Great Moon Nebula. During that turmoil, the leader of Mezu, the father of Bela and I, mysteriously disappeared. Our mother died in an accident. Without a leader, our uncle was elected as the new leader of Mezu. Bela and I thought that the disaster was over, but we didn't expect that it was just the beginning. After becoming the new leader of Mezu, our uncle, Iacos, set his eyes on Bela and wanted to give Bela to the tyrants as a gift. He wanted to form an alliance with the tyrants and raise the status of Mezu in the Holy Cluster. When we found out about this, we were naturally against it. However, Iacos ignored us and even threatened Bela with killing me. It was also at that time that we found out that our father's disappearance and mother's death were not an accident. Chapter 1170. At the mention of her parents' accident, Caro's face flashed with hatred. It was Iacos who plotted everything. He was the one who destroyed Bela and my family. He destroyed our family for his own selfish reasons. Luzi looked at Caro sympathetically and asked, "Has Iacos caused any trouble for you all these years?" Caro shook her head. Bela and I ran far away. His tentacles couldn't reach the Great Moon Nebula. That's why we spent the past 100 years outside. At this point, Caro paused and looked at LVZ with a subtle gaze. If it weren't for you coming to the Great Moon Nebula, perhaps Bela and I wouldn't have come back for the rest of our lives. For Caro and Bela, the Great Moon Nebula used to be their home, but it was also a place of sadness. Before they had the power to take everything back from Iacos, they didn't want to come back and face it. Caro and Bela didn't even think about using Qinchuan to take back everything that belonged to them. They knew that before they had any more value to him, Qinchuan wouldn't help them. Luzi looked at Caro and said, "The reason we came to the Great Moon Nebula is because Zerg's troops used it to return to the Sage Monarch continent. We wanted to investigate the situation." Caro thought for a moment, then said, "If you want to investigate this matter, you'll have to cross paths with the Mezu. The teleportation portal from the Great Moon Nebula to the Sage Monarch continent is controlled by the Mezu. However, it doesn't belong to the Mezu. The Mezu is only responsible for guarding it." She nodded and asked Caro, "You should know a lot about the Mezu. Where do you suggest we start?" Caro thought for a moment, then turned to Bela and said, "Bela, you should know better than me what to do." Bela was silent for a moment, then said to Luzi, "My former teacher was in charge of guarding the teleportation portal. She must know something about it, but I can't guarantee that she still cares about us." Luzi asked curiously, "Can you tell me more about your teacher?" Bela nodded. Then she turned to Luzi and said, "My teacher's name is Jessie. She's the strongest swordswoman in the Mezu. Back in the day, she was in the peak of the insightful void stage. She hasn't reached the body fusion stage yet, otherwise I would have heard about her. If she hadn't covered for me and my sister, we wouldn't have been able to escape the Great Moon Nebula. After we settled down, we asked around about my teacher. It was said that Iacos wanted to kill my teacher to vent his anger. However, my teacher had many students in the clan and was highly respected. Iacos wanted to stabilize his rule over the Mezu, so he couldn't do anything to my teacher. Otherwise, the Mezu would definitely fall apart. This was something he didn't want to see, so he demoted my teacher to guard the teleportation portal. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. The job of guarding the teleportation portal is very boring. I don't know if my teacher is still the same after 100 years, but I can try to contact my teacher. Hearing Bela's words, Luzi nodded and said to Bela with some emotion, "Your teacher doesn't have it easy either. I'll have to trouble you this time." After Luzi left, Caro looked at Bela and said, "Do you really want to contact Teacher Jessie?" Bela nodded and said, "If there's anyone in this world who can help me find myself again, it must be Teacher Jessie." Bela longed for change. Lu Zi returned to Qinchuan and said to Qinchuan, "I've asked around. They have some connections in the Great Moon Nebula, and they happen to be the officers guarding the teleportation portal. They should know something about Zerg." Hearing Lu Zi's words, Qinchuan nodded slightly and said, "But I see that you don't look too good. What's wrong?" Lu Zi sighed and said, "Karo and Bela's experience is really tragic." Lu Zi immediately told Qinchuan the story of Karo and Bela. After hearing Lu Zi's description, Qinchuan sighed and said, "This is the fate of people." Lu Zi looked at Qinchuan and said, "Actually, our experience back then was worse than Karo and Bela's. We were almost exterminated. But fortunately we had you. You protected all of us." Qinchuan chuckled and said, "If you want to praise me, just be direct. Don't beat around the bush. Be reasonable. I think you're right." Lu Zi rolled her eyes and said, "You're the only one who knows how to praise yourself." Lu Zi sat down beside Qinchuan and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Qinchuan pondered for a moment and said to Lu Zi, "Let Bela contact her teacher first. If we directly attack Iacos, we might alarm Zerg, so I don't want to do it unless it's absolutely necessary." Lu Zi nodded and said, "If the investigation results are out, what do you plan to do?" Qinchuan thought for a moment and said, "I have to do something memorable." The core of the Great Moon Nebula was a mountain-like continent called Mount Great Moon. The city of Mount Great Moon was built on the mountain and had distinctive features. The airport of Mount Great Moon was located at the foot of the mountain. Qinchuan and the others were outsiders, so they could only move around the outer ring at the foot of Mount Great Moon. If they wanted to enter the middle ring, they had to pay a high entrance fee. As for the inner ring, it was the private territory of the Meizu. Other than the Meizu's people, no one else could enter. Qinchuan and the others first found a hotel to stay, then Bela tried to contact Jessie. "I've sent the email. If teacher sees it, she might reply to me. Maybe we'll be exposed." Although Bela had deep feelings for Jessie, she was not sure if Jessie still had feelings for her after so many years. What she was most worried about now was that not only would she not be able to help Qinchuan, but she would also cause trouble for Qinchuan. Qinchuan smiled and comforted Bela, "It's okay. Even if the Meizu comes out to encircle us, we can still retreat easily." Buzz. Just as Qinchuan was talking, Bela's optical computer suddenly received an email, and the sender was Jessie. Chapter 1171. On the peak of the inner ring of the Great Moon Mountain, a figure in black armor stood on the edge of the cliff, looking in the direction of the foot of the mountain with a complicated expression. There was joy, surprise, and more than that, worry on his face. Jessie did not expect that after more than 100 years, the student she was proud of would contact her again. "Bela, it's been so many years. How have you been?" Jessie murmured in a low voice. "Have you come back for revenge?" But Iacos is no longer the Iacos of the past. Looking at the address attached to the optical computer's email, Jessie hesitated for a moment. Finally, she decided to meet Bela in person. If possible, she hoped that Bela could put aside her hatred and leave the Great Moon Mountain as soon as possible. "Sir, it's time to arrange the guards for next month." As Jessie's deputy, Kalen had always been helping Jessie with all his heart. At the same time, he was also monitoring Jessie because he was the person Iacos had arranged to be by Jessie's side. More than 100 years had passed, but Iacos had never given up on finding Bela. Hearing Kalen's words, Jessie was silent for a moment. Then, she said, "I want to rest today. Kalen, you can arrange the guards for me." Kalen looked at Jessie with some surprise. Since Jessie came here, this was the first time that she wanted to rest. However, after seeing the vicissitudes of life on Jessie's face, he suddenly understood Jessie. After so many years, Jessie should be very tired. She was once the #1 swordsman, but now she could not hold on any longer. Kalen did not associate Jessie's rest with Bela's return at all. He had been monitoring Jesse for more than 100 years. Bela and Jesse had never contacted each other, and Jesse had never had any problems. Although it was strange that Jesse suddenly wanted to rest today, he did not think that it was because of Bela's return. "Yes, sir. Please rest well. I will arrange the rest." Kalen left. After everything was arranged properly, he would report this matter to his superiors. As for what decision and reaction the superiors would make, it was not something that he could interfere with. When night fell, the outer ring of Great Moon Mountain was still very lively. In this world where cultivators walked everywhere, there was no such thing as having to sleep and rest at night. When Jessie, who had changed into plain clothes, appeared in the outer ring, she did not attract anyone's attention. The world had long forgotten this former #1 swordsman. Meiwa Hotel. This is the place. When Jessie walked into Meiwa Hotel, Knight Serenity, who had been waiting here for a long time, suddenly appeared beside Jessie. She looked at Jessie, who was on guard, and said lightly, "I am Bela's friend." Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Jessie was a little surprised. She could see that Knight Serenity was an overlord at the combination stage. She did not expect that Knight Serenity was Bela's friend. No wonder Bela had the courage to come back. It turned out that she had a helper. Even so, she still did not think highly of Bela. "Come with me." Knight Serenity turned and walked toward the elevator. Jessie followed Knight Serenity into the elevator. The two of them were silent all the way. Neither of them spoke. When Jessie returned to the room and saw Bela, she was finally moved. The two of them hugged each other excitedly. Caro, who was standing beside them, could not help but burst into tears. "Teacher, I thought I would never see you again in my life." Bela hugged Jessie tightly and breathed in the familiar smell of Jessie. She had been with Jessie since she was very young. Now she had found the familiar feeling of the past. "Bela, my Bela, you shouldn't have come back." Jessie burst into tears. She could not bear to leave Bela, the student she was once proud of, but Great Moon Mountain was really too dangerous. Bela shook her head and said, "Teacher, you don't have to worry about me. I'll be fine." Jessie looked at Bela and sighed. "I thought you had already reached the form synthesis stage. That's why I dared to come back. Now, it seems that it was not the case." As she spoke, Jessie looked at Qinchuan and the other strangers and asked Bela, "Are they all your friends?" Bela glanced at Qinchuan and then said to Jessie, "I was rescued by this lord. He is my leader." Then, Bela told Jessie what had happened some time ago. When Jessie heard what had happened, she could not help but be shocked. She had heard about what had happened on planet Iron Tower. She had thought that it was the Wind Clan who had done it, and had even sighed at how powerful they were. She had never thought that they were just scapegoats. The real culprit was right in front of her. "Thank you for saving Bela. She's a pitiful child." Jessie bowed to Qinchuan. She really felt sorry for Bela. Her life had been full of hardships, and it had not been easy for her. Qinchuan calmly said, "There's no need to thank me, Jessie. We didn't invite you here just for you to catch up with Bela. We have something we want to ask you." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Jessie said to Qinchuan, "Please ask. If it's something I know, I'll definitely tell you." Qinchuan looked at Jessie and said, "You've been guarding the teleportation portal to the Sage Monarch continent all these years, haven't you?" Jessie nodded. "Yes. I've been guarding the portal for 140 years. This is the first time I've ever left." Qinchuan immediately asked, "Then a few years ago, Zerg sent a group of people back to the Sage Monarch continent through the portal on Mount Great Moon. You must know about it, right?" Jessie was surprised to hear Qinchuan's question. "You're here for the Sacred Ones?" "Zerg," Qinchuan said, looking at Jessie. "This is very important. Please answer." Jessie looked at Bela and saw Bela nod. "That's right. About 3 years ago, Sage, Zerg used the teleportation portal on the Sage Monarch continent to get to Mount Great Moon. After leaving for a while, He used the portal to get back to the Sage Monarch continent. Qin took a deep breath and asked, "Did you notice anything out of the ordinary? For example, did you notice someone special among them?" Jessie recalled for a moment, then nodded and said, "At that time, when they entered the teleportation array, they did indeed bring along a rather special person. This person was especially weak, only at the nascent soul stage, so I had a very deep impression of him." Qin and Lu Zi's breathing quickened at Jessie's answer. Their guess was correct. Chapter 1172. Qin suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked Jessie, "Do you still remember the appearance of that nascent soul stage cultivator?" Jessie shook her head and replied, "At that time, he was imprisoned in a cage. I only sensed his aura, but I didn't see his appearance." Hearing Jessie's answer, Qin sighed softly and said in a low voice, "Very good, but that's not important." Yes, it was no longer important to Qin, who was captured by Zerd. Because he knew that such a thing had happened, his guess was correct, and his identity had been exposed. That was enough for him. After asking a few simple questions, Qin didn't intend to continue asking. Seeing this, Jessie said to Qin, "My lord, since you have the results of the investigation, can you take Bela and the others away from the Great Moon Mountain as soon as possible?" Seeing the almost pleading expression on Jessie's face, Lu Zi was a little puzzled and asked, "What are you afraid of? Yakos? I don't think he has the ability to threaten us." Jessie sighed and said to Lu Zi, "You don't understand how terrifying Yakos is." Lu Zi smiled and said calmly, "You don't understand how terrifying we are either." Seeing Lu Zi's confidence, Jessie looked at Qin subtly. After seeing that Qin was indifferent, she said to Lu Zi, "But the Meizu today is no longer the Meizu of 100 years ago. The current Meizu has at least 5 overlords of the body integration stage." 5 overlords of the body integration stage. Hearing Jessie's words, everyone's faces showed a touch of surprise. Even Bela and Karo were no exception. "Teacher, how can there be 5 overlords of the body integration stage in the Meizu?" Bela was very puzzled. 100 years ago, there was only one Iakos. Jessie sighed and said, "That's why I said you don't understand how terrifying Iakos is. In just over 100 years, he forcibly raised the strength of 4 of his trusted subordinates to the body integration stage." "That's too exaggerated." Lu Zi was in disbelief. How can Iakos have such a powerful ability? Even Qin, who was originally not interested in this matter, was now full of curiosity. He wanted to know how Iakos did it. Could it be that Iakos also had some special bloodline? In the face of everyone's curiosity, Jessie fell silent for a moment. Then, she looked at Bela and Karo and said softly, "Do you know why Iakos suddenly betrayed us, framed your parents and even killed them?" Although Karo and Bela knew that Iakos was behind those things, they didn't know why Iakos did it. Now, it seemed that Jessie knew? "Teacher, what's going on?" This question had been in Bela's heart for more than 100 years. She had to get to the bottom of it today. Jessie looked helplessly at Bela and said, "Iakos suddenly betrayed us because he found a way to help others quickly advance to the form synthesis stage. This caused his ambition to soar rapidly. He was no longer willing to submit to your parents." "What kind of ability is that?" Karo couldn't help but ask. "What did he do?" Jessie pursed her lips and said, "A rune stone. He found a rune stone." When everyone heard Jessie's words, they were all shocked. They had thought of many possibilities, but they had never thought about rune stones. Qin, who was originally just a little curious, was now full of interest. He loved rune stones the most. Almost everyone present had heard of the legend of rune stones. Legend had it that anyone who obtained a rune stone could easily advance to the form synthesis stage and become an overlord of the universe. Iakos, who had obtained a rune stone, was able to advance 4 people to the form synthesis stage in a short 100 years. It didn't seem to be something that was hard to believe. Qin looked at Jessie and said, "How did you know about this?" When Jessie heard this, she looked at Qin with a complicated expression and said, "This rune stone originally belonged to Bela's parents. As their trusted aide, I was supposed to be the first to use it. However, Yakos took the rune stone away and killed Bela's parent. When I heard the news, it was already too late. There was nothing I could do except to keep this secret and live on." When Bela and Caro heard Jessie's words, they couldn't help but be shocked. However, this shock quickly turned into intense hatred. They trembled and suppressed the anger in their hearts. If they could, they really wanted to tear Yakos apart. "That bastard! He's our uncle. How could he do such a thing?" Caro roared in a low voice. Her face was filled with pain and anger. Bela held Caro's hand tightly and said through gritted teeth, "I want revenge. I want to avenge my dead parents." Jessie shook her head at Bela and said, "No, you're still too weak. Yakos has a total of 5 form synthesis stage overlords, while you only have 2. The difference is too great. Moreover, as far as I know, Yakos is already at the mid-form synthesis stage. He's even about to advance to the late-form synthesis stage." When they heard Jessie's words, Bela and Caro couldn't help but show a touch of despair. In the face of such a powerful Yakos, if they went to seek revenge now, it would be no different from courting death. In the face of such a force, Qin would definitely not be willing to help them. When she saw the despair on Bela and Caro's faces, Jessie sighed helplessly and said, "Leave this place, children. Come back when you're strong enough. I believe that you'll definitely be able to succeed in your revenge. However, now is not the time." Originally, Jessie thought that after she revealed this information, Qin and the others would be afraid of Yakos and leave the Great Moon Mountain as soon as possible. However, she didn't expect that Qin was not frightened at all. Instead, he became excited. "Jessie, have you seen that rune stone? How big is it?" When she heard Qin's question, Jessie was stunned for a moment. Then, she replied, "It's very big. It's a cylinder with a diameter of about 20 centimeters and a length of about 1 meter. It's really beautiful." Qin almost couldn't help but whistle. A rune stone more than 1 meter long was bigger than any rune stone he had obtained before. In fact, it was much bigger. It was definitely a great supplement for the rune sword. Chapter 1173. Seeing the joyful expression on Qin's face, Jessie couldn't help but ask, "You want that rune stone?" Qin chuckled and asked, "Can't I?" Seeing that Qin was really interested in that rune stone, Jessie shook her head and persuaded Qin, "I'd advise you to give up on that unrealistic idea. Yakos regards that rune stone as very important and will never leave his side. If you want that rune stone, you'll have to defeat Yakos in a direct confrontation. With your current strength, this will be very difficult." Jessie wasn't trying to boost the morale of others and put down her own prestige. Instead, it was because Qin's group had Argentin, followed by Knight Serenity, who was a mid-body integration stage overlord and an early body integration stage overlord respectively. On the other hand, Yakos had a total of 5 body integration stage overlords, including Yakos, who was infinitely close to the late body integration stage. If Qin's group wanted to clash with such a force, they'd need at least 3 body integration stage overlords to help them. However, these 3 body integration stage overlords couldn't be found anywhere. Qin looked at Jessie's serious expression and smiled. "You don't have to worry about that. I have a way to deal with Yakos. You just need to tell me how to find him." Seeing that Qin was so stubborn, Jessie couldn't help but frown. "Don't you need to ask for the opinions of others?" Jessie felt that Qin was too arrogant and egotistical. More importantly, when Qin said those words, no one had any intention of refuting Qin. Could it be that these people were all crazy? Are they just going to let Qin do whatever he wants? Knight Serenity smiled at Jesse's puzzled expression and said to Jesse, although our cultivation levels seem to be higher than his, we're all his subordinates. We have to follow his decisions, even if it sounds unreasonable. Hearing Knight Serenity's words, Jesse looked at Qin in a different light. A person who could be protected by two body integration stage overlords definitely wasn't an ordinary person. Perhaps he was a key figure of a great power or even the successor of an ancient powerful clan. However, when she looked at Qinhuan's face, she couldn't associate Qinhuan with the ancient powerful clans Ors. Seeing Jesse's puzzled look, Qinhuan smiled and said to Jesse, "You don't have to think or ask too much. Just tell me how to find Iacos. You don't have to worry about anything else." Jesse hesitated for a moment, but finally answered Qinhuan's question. Iacos is in the inner circle of the Great Moon Mountain. He's in his private cultivation room. It's the tallest building in the inner circle. It's easy to find. Jesse was worried that something would happen to her if she stayed here, so she left quickly. After Jesse left, Caro asked Qinhuan, "Are you really going to find Iacos?" Qinhuan nodded and said to Caro, "That talisman stone should have belonged to your parents. Now that your parents are gone, you should inherit it. However, I want that talisman stone, so I'll give it to you as a thank you gift for avenging you. How about that?" Hearing Qinhuan's words, Caro smiled bitterly and said, "Sir, if you want that talisman stone, Bela and I will definitely not fight for it. However, this is really dangerous." Qinhuan smiled and said to Caro, "I've encountered more dangerous situations than this. This is nothing." At this point, Qinhuan looked at Bela, who finally raised her head. He saw the deep hatred in Bela's eyes and said faintly, "Hatred is a very powerful force. With this force, you can become stronger, but at the same time, you can also turn into a demon. I hope that you can stay true to yourself and not let hatred get to your head." Hearing Qinhuan's words, Bela looked at Qinhuan with a complicated gaze and said, "If I want to kill Iacos with my own hands, will you agree?" Qinhuan nodded and said to Bela, "I'll leave him with one last breath. Thank you." Bela looked deeply at Qinhuan and said, "After this, my life is yours." Qinhuan smiled and pointed at Lu Zi, who was sitting at the side, and said, "You can talk to her about this." In the inner ring of the Great Moon Mountain, Iacos's private cultivation room. Iacos was sitting on a soft sofa, holding a glass of red wine that had been collected for thousands of years. He gently sipped and savored the taste. He seemed to be enjoying himself very much. He liked this feeling. He was in control of everything and didn't have to listen to anyone. At least in the Great Moon Mountain and the Great Moon Nebula. In front of him, on the open ground, 4 cultivators in the exceptional insightful void stage were meditating on a cylindrical talisman stone. These 4 people were Iacos's most trusted subordinate. They were the second batch of cultivators in the Great Moon Mountain who could meditate on the talisman stone. They would become the 6th, 8th, and 9th overlords of the form synthesis stage in the Great Moon Mountain. After the second batch of cultivators successfully reached the form synthesis stage, Iacos would start to invade the outside world and seize territory. He wanted to expand and make the Meizu a big force in the Holy Cluster, second only to the Holy Clan. This was his ambition. With the talisman stone, he had enough capital to support his actions and fulfill his ambition. Patriarch Kalen sent a message. Jesse has left the transmitting formation. A subordinate standing behind Iacos suddenly leaned over and whispered in Iacos's ear the information he had just received from Kalen. Hearing his subordinate's words, Iacos was slightly stunned. Then, he remembered who Jesse was. Jesse had disappeared from his world since Jesse was sent to guard the transmitting formation more than 100 years ago. Now that she was mentioned again, he recalled some of the things that had happened in the past. This old woman has been obedient for more than 100 years. Finally, she can't stand it anymore? Marcos smiled coldly. He had already forgotten about Jesse's existence. Since Jesse had taken the initiative to jump out, he could get rid of Jesse. It could be considered as settling a knot in his heart. Now that the Meizu was completely under his control, and Jesse's prestige had already fallen to the lowest point, killing Jesse would not pose any threat to his rule. No one would even know that Jesse was dead. Yakos took a sip of red wine and said indifferently to his subordinate, "Tell Curtin to find Kaelin and wait for Jesse to return. Kill Jesse and bury her on the mountain." At this point, Yakos paused for a moment, then said, "Also, find out where Jesse went. I'm guessing that my lovely nieces should have returned." Chapter 1174. Dong. A dull sound suddenly came from the top of the cultivation room. Yakos, who was tasting wine, raised his head subconsciously and looked up. He frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "Let's go and see what happened, Dong." Another extremely muffled sound rang out, but this time, a protrusion actually appeared on the sturdy roof of the cultivation room. It looked like a fist imprint. Bang! Finally, when the third violent sound was heard, the roof of the training room was blasted open. A beautiful figure covered in black and purple scales broke in through the hole and landed on the ground of the training room. Yakos looked at the figure standing in front of him with gloomy eyes and asked, "Who are you?" Yakos was very angry. He didn't expect that someone could avoid all the monitoring devices and guards in the manor, break the defense array of the cultivation room, and even the roof, and appear in front of him in such an arrogant and ridiculous way. Night Serenity smiled in the face of Yakos's question. She didn't answer Yakos's question. She turned her head and looked at the rune stone that was protected by 4 cultivators in the exceptional insightful void stage and asked, "Is this the rune stone? It's really big." Hearing Night Serenity's words, Yakos understood that the other party must have come for the rune stone. At the same time, the manor was filled with the sound of alarms. Obviously, someone had broken into the manor. It seemed that this person was in the same group as the person in front of him. Whoosh! Several figures appeared behind Yakos and looked at Night Serenity cautiously. They were Yakos's most loyal subordinates. At the same time, they were also the first group of people to reach the form synthesis stage with the help of the rune stone. Curtin, who was supposed to kill Jesse at the teleporter, pursed his lips and said to Yakos, "Family head, I didn't find Jesse when I went to the teleporter. Also, Kaelin is already dead." Hearing Curtin's words, Yakos smiled playfully and said to Night Serenity, "It seems that you came prepared. Tell me, how many people do you have?" "Not many. We're all here." The person who answered Yakos was not Night Serenity, but Qin Chuan, who had just walked in from the front door of the cultivation room. He casually threw the bodies of the 2 guards on the ground and walked to Yakos with a smile. Looking at Qin Chuan, who was only at the peak of the insightful void stage, Yakos felt a little funny. He didn't expect that after so many years of seclusion, his first opponent would be a cultivator at the peak of the insightful void stage. Since when could a little guy at the peak of the insightful void stage be so arrogant? "You're very interesting." Yakos looked at Qin Chuan. He felt that Qin Chuan was either a fool or had nothing to fear. So until now, he didn't have the intention to attack Qin Chuan. Anyway, he already had victory in his hands. As long as he gave the order, this farce would be over soon. However, Qin Chuan didn't have the intention to chat with Yakos. He glanced at Night Serenity and said, "Go and keep the rune stone." The reason why Night Serenity came here alone was to prevent Yakos from taking the rune stone. After all, Yakos' strength couldn't be underestimated. If Yakos took the rune stone in advance and Yakos escaped, then their efforts would be in vain. Night Serenity nodded and walked towards the rune stone. Seeing this, Yakos' expression became extremely gloomy. Qin Chuan didn't put him in his eyes at all. You guys were invited here by Bela and Caro, right? Jesse went to see you guys today. Yakos looked sharply at Qinchuan and said in a deep voice, You have the guts to meddle in our Meizu's affairs. Aren't you afraid of death? Qinchuan chuckled and said, Originally, I couldn't be bothered with this matter. But who asked you to have something in your hands that I want? Looking at the smile on Qinchuan's face, Yakos felt extremely disgusted. He snorted and said to Curtin, Go! Break his limbs. Hearing Yakos's order, Curtin appeared in front of Qinchuan in a flash. When he released the pressure of a combination stage overlord on Qinchuan without any scruples, Qinchuan didn't seem to feel the pressure at all and smiled. Bang! When Curtin punched Qinchuan's shoulder and tried to shatter Qinchuan's shoulder, he found that his strength was like a stone sinking into the sea. It didn't even cause a splash. At this moment, the expression on Curtin's face changed. He realized that something was wrong, but it was too late for him to get away from Qinchuan at this time. Leifa Qianjun. Accompanied by a fierce thunder, Curtin's chest was penetrated by Qinchuan's Leifa. The violent power of thunder wandered around Curtin's body. Curtin didn't even have time to scream before he died under Leifa. Plop! Curtin's body fell straight to the ground. Looking at Curtin's body, the expressions on the faces of Yakos and the others were extremely stiff, extremely shocked, and even at a loss. A guy at the peak of the insightful void stage actually killed Curtin, who was at the form synthesis stage. How was this possible? For Qinchuan, this was a very simple matter. After all, Curtin was only an overlord at the form synthesis stage who had merged his strength into one. He wasn't an overlord at the form synthesis stage who had merged his strength with the power of law. Such a person could only crush ordinary cultivators at the insightful void stage. In front of Qinchuan, Curtin was just a piece of cake. Qinchuan glanced at the dead Curtin, then looked at Yakos and sighed. I was curious about how miraculous the rune stone was. It turns out that it can only help people to quickly merge their strength. How can a cultivator at the form synthesis stage be called an overlord? Hearing Qinchuan's words, the people who were shocked by Curtin's death came back to their senses. Everyone looked at Qinchuan with eyes full of horror. Qinchuan could kill Curtin in an instant. This meant that Qinchuan could also kill them in an instant. How could they not be terrified? Yakos stepped forward. At this time, if he didn't step forward, the morale of the people would completely collapse. Qinchuan killing Curtin in an instant was indeed a little shocking, but he absolutely didn't believe that Qinchuan could kill him in an instant. He was an overlord at the form synthesis stage, who had truly merged with the power of law. Moreover, he was an overlord at the middle stage of the form synthesis stage. Boy, if you tell me your background now, maybe I can spare your life. Yakos was ready to attack. If Qinchuan couldn't give him a reason to negotiate, he would kill Qinchuan without hesitation and ruthlessly crush Qinchuan. Chapter 1175. Qinchuan chuckled at the gloomy Yakos and said, I don't have any background. If you have the ability, then kill me. Boom. As soon as Qinchuan finished speaking, an extremely astonishing force suddenly erupted from Yakos' body and rushed towards Qinchuan. The unguarded Qinchuan was sent flying and crashed into the wall of the cultivation room, breaking through the wall and escaping. When Night Serenity saw this scene, she frowned slightly as she was putting away the rune stone. When she thought of Qinchuan's previous instructions, she decided to stand aside and watch for the time being. In the ruins, before Qinchuan could stand up, Yakos' figure had already appeared in front of him. He raised his hand and punched out. Qinchuan subconsciously used the lightning escape to dodge the punch, narrowly avoiding it. Rumble! Although Yakos' punch didn't hit Qinchuan, it shattered the ground. The entire manor seemed to have experienced a violent earthquake, causing a large area to collapse. Qinchuan stood in the air in the distance and looked at Yakos with a grave expression. Yako's strength was stronger than the average mid-heavenly integration stage overlord. At the very least, Argentin shouldn't be a match for Yakos. Yakos slowly raised his head and looked at Qinchuan. When he saw that Qinchuan wasn't injured apart from being a little dirty, he was a little surprised. This was because the strength of Qinchuan's physical body didn't seem like that of a cultivator at the peak of the insightful emptiness stage at all. Qinchuan and Yakos looked at each other and grinned. Again. In the face of Qinchuan's provocation, Yakos' expression suddenly turned cold. He raised his hand and punched towards Qinchuan. When Qinchuan saw Yakos raise his hand, he already sensed danger. When Yakos punched, Qinchuan had no time to dodge. He growled and a golden rune array suddenly appeared in front of him. Level 6 defensive rune array, immovable golden light. Gotcha! The golden light shattered. Qinchuan took this opportunity to increase the distance between him and Yakos. At this moment, Yakos' figure appeared in front of Qinchuan in an extremely strange manner. He raised his hand and punched out. Bang! 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 Qinchuan had no chance to dodge and had no choice but to face Yakos head-on. However, Qinchuan's counterattack didn't have any effect on Yakos at all. It only barely blocked Yakos' attack. Lu Zi, who was watching the battle from afar, couldn't help but frown when she saw this scene. She whispered, "Why is Yakos so strong?" Lu Zi originally thought that Qinchuan would be able to defeat Yakos easily and defeat Yakos in an instant. However, judging from the current situation, Qinchuan didn't seem to have any intention of defeating Yakos in an instant. Moreover, Yakos wasn't someone who could be defeated so easily. Jessie didn't know what to say when she heard Lu Zi's words. After all, Qinchuan was only at the peak of the insightful emptiness realm, while Yakos was an overlord at the middle stage of the combination stage. It was already very difficult for Qinchuan to not be killed by Yakos in an instant and even barely block Yakos' attack. Lu Zi actually said that Yakos was so strong? Shouldn't she be asking why Qinchuan was so monstrous? Argentin glanced at the battle between Qinchuan and Yakos, then said to Lu Zi, "Although Qinchuan has the strength to fight above his level, the problem is that Yakos isn't an ordinary overlord at the middle stage of the combination stage. His strength has been strengthened by rune stones. The most important thing is that Qinchuan didn't use any killing move. Instead, he relied on his own strength to fight head-on with Yakos." As a veteran overlord of the celestial cluster, Argentin's vision was naturally higher than Lu Zi's. From Lu Zi's point of view, Qinchuan seemed to be suppressed by Yakos and was beaten up a little miserably. However, from Argentin's point of view, Qinchuan's performance was already very strong. If Qinchuan used Leifa, Sky Splitter, Skylight, Sky Sword, etc., would Yakos still be able to suppress Qinchuan? It would be good enough if he wasn't killed in an instant. After hearing Argentin's words, Lu Zi's slightly worried mood was slightly relieved. She knew that Qinchuan was training himself, but she was worried that Qinchuan wouldn't be able to control the situation well and would be injured by Yakos. On the other side, Karo and Bela saw Qinchuan fight for the first time. This time, they were completely shocked by Qinchuan. How can he be so strong? Bela couldn't believe it. Even though she saw it with her own eyes, she still found it hard to believe that Qinchuan was so strong that he could fight head-on with the overlord at the middle stage of the combination stage, Yakos with his strength at the peak of the paradise realm. If she was the one facing Yakos, she would have probably reported to the 9 underworlds by now. She wouldn't even have the chance to report to the 9 underworlds. I don't know either. Although Karo knew Qinchuan earlier than Bela, she and Jessie had always thought that Qinchuan was an important figure in some big force. She had never thought that Qinchuan's actual combat strength would be so strong. At this moment, if there was anyone who was the most shocked, it would be Yakos. As the person who was fighting with Qinchuan, no one knew better than him how strong and terrifying Qinchuan was. He had lived for more than 1,000 years, but this was the first time he met such a freak at the peak of the Paradise realm. "Hey, is this all you have?" Qin Chuan smiled at Iacos, his face full of disdain and provocation. In the face of Qin Chuan's provocation, Iacos was furious. He roared and finally used the power of law. The law of water. Qin Chuan suddenly felt countless water droplets appearing around him. These water droplets gathered and wrapped around Qin Chuan. In the face of Iacos' murderous intent, Qin Chuan finally stopped testing Iacos. He also used his true ability and used the law of space to devour the water droplets around him. However, what surprised Qin Chuan was that the devouring speed after the space collapsed was slower than the formation of water droplets. Sky-piercing. Qin Chuan had no choice but to use the sky-piercing to break the lake that had gathered around him and rush out. Seeing this, Iacos' expression became extremely distorted. He didn't expect that Qin Chuan would still have a way to escape after he used the power of law. He was really angry this time. Ocean. Following Iacos' roar, Qin Chuan's figure suddenly appeared in a vast ocean. The undercurrent swept and attacked Qin Chuan heavily. In just a moment, Qin Chuan was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. However, Iacos' attack did not stop there. He raised his finger again at Qin Chuan and said in a deep voice, "Water explosion." As Iacos' voice fell, the vast ocean suddenly compressed into a ball and then suddenly exploded. Boom! Whoosh! Like a thunderclap, it was followed by a torrential downpour. Chapter 1176. The heavy rain blurred everyone's vision and also compressed their perception range. Everyone was extremely anxious and nervous. They were all worried about Qin Chuan's safety. Iacos' sudden killing move was too strong. Crash! The rain finally stopped. When the heavy rain stopped, everyone immediately looked at Iacos, who was standing in the air, but Qin Chuan had disappeared without a trace. Even his aura could not be sensed. This, Lu Zi's eyes widened. She did not believe that Qin Chuan would be killed by Iacos. "Don't worry, the contract between me and him hasn't been broken. He's still alive." Argentin, who was standing beside Lu Zi, comforted Lu Zi. She was also curious about where Qin Chuan had gone. Hearing Argentin's words, Lu Zi's heart, which was in her throat, finally settled down. She looked around and then asked Argentin, "Can you find where he is through the contract? Did Iacos kidnap him?" "It shouldn't be." Argentin shook her head. "Iacos doesn't seem to know where Qin Chuan has gone." Lu Zi subconsciously looked at Iacos. Sure enough, Iacos had a suspicious look on his face at this time. He looked around and opened up his perception. He seemed to be looking for Qin Chuan. Although he was very confident in his previous move, he always felt that Qin Chuan would not die so easily. Kacha, kacha. Just as everyone was looking for Qin Chuan, the space in the center of the water explosion suddenly shattered. A ragged figure walked out of it. Everyone was stunned when they saw this figure. What is this? Did he just enter a different space? Argentin's eyes widened. She could not believe it. She had never seen anyone who could enter a different space and come out unscathed. Argentin was not the only one who was shocked by Qin Chuan. Everyone present was shocked by Qin Chuan. Every one of them had more or less mastered the law of space. Some of them could even make space collapse. However, no one had ever dared to enter a different space after a space collapse, because no one who entered could come out alive. But now they saw a person walk out of a different space with their own eyes. "Are you a monster?" Iacos was frightened. He wanted to know what kind of monster he was fighting with. This guy was only at the exceptional void realm. How could he display such terrifying power? Qin Chuan grinned at Jax and said, "Just treat me as a monster." In fact, Qin Chuan had a lingering fear at this time. He had underestimated Iacos. If he did not hide in the different space and time, Even if he did not die in the water explosion, he would have been seriously injured. As for why he could come out of the different space unscathed, it involved a relatively ancient secret. In the past, it was not that no one could come out of the different space alive, but every person who came out was of the bloodline of the true dragon. As the inherited law of the true dragon, no one in the universe understood the law of space better than the true dragon. Qinchuan happened to be one of the few people in the world who had the bloodline of the true dragon. He was also the only person who could enter a different space and come out unscathed. However, with Qinchuan's current strength, he could only stay in the different space for a while. If he stayed for too long, he would be torn apart by the different space. Today's test is over. Qinchuan already had a rough idea of the limits of his current combat strength. He did not want to continue testing Yakos. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Yakos seemed to have thought of something. But before he could do anything, a black ring suddenly appeared at his waist. It was a strange phenomenon caused by the collapse of space. Without any warning, Yakos's body was cut into two. Marcos lowered his head to look at his legs that were falling to the ground. His face was filled with fear, and he couldn't help but let out an extremely terrified scream. His voice was hoarse. Not only was Yakos shocked by this sudden change, everyone else was also stunned by this move. A mid-heavenly integration stage overlord was cut in half at the waist just like that. The only person who was not shocked was Qinchuan, because he was the one who used this move to cut Yakos in half. As Qinchuan's cultivation level continued to increase, his attainments in the law of space also became deeper and deeper. Not long ago, when he broke through to the peak of the insightful void realm, he mastered this move that could cut Yakos in half silently. Space Slash. It was a very casual and ordinary name, but its lethality was incomparably shocking. Even a powerful overlord like Yakos was not aware of it beforehand. How terrifying! Qinchuan looked at Yakos, who was screaming in pain, and sighed softly. This move not only cut Yakos's body into two, but it also completely cut Yakos's body into pieces. The reason why Yakos was screaming in pain was because he was completely pulverized. This was probably like splitting a living person into countless cells in an instant. This level of pain was definitely not something an ordinary person could endure. Qinchuan sighed softly and said to Bela, who was not far away, "Hey, didn't you want to kill him with your own hands? Then do it now, he's going to die in a while." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Bela seemed to have woken up from a dream. She glanced at Yakos, who was screaming in pain, and the suppressed hatred in her heart immediately surged up, almost swallowing her completely. "Yakos, go to hell!" Bela roared and rushed towards Yakos, who had already lost the ability to resist. With a punch, Yakos's body split apart prematurely and turned into ashes. At this time, Qinchuan had already returned to Lu Zi's side. He held Lu Zi with one hand and whispered, "Hold on to me. Let's go back to the spaceship and leave this place." After holding Qinchuan's hand, Lu Zi immediately sensed that Qinchuan was weak. She immediately realized that it was not easy for Qinchuan to use the space slash earlier, and it was even a little forced. Immediately, she did not care about what others thought and directly pulled Qinchuan back to the spaceship. "Don't worry, I won't die, and I'm not injured either. I'm just exhausted." Qinchuan sighed. He was helpless. These killer moves that he had mastered, whether it was the flipping sky seal or the space slash, always liked to drain the energy from his body. The feeling of having all the energy in his body drained in an instant was really, really uncomfortable. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Lu Zi pursed her lips and said, "Don't be so stubborn in the future." Qinchuan nodded and said, "This is just an experiment. Now that I know the results, I won't do such a stupid thing again." Chapter 1177. Qinchuan and Lu Zi returned to the spaceship, leaving the aftermath to Argentine and Knight Serenity. Although Iacos still had 3 overlords in the form synthesis stage, they were no match for Argentine and Knight Serenity. Soon, they were defeated by Argentine and Knight Serenity, and were killed by Bela. After settling these matters, Knight Serenity looked at Bela and said, "You can choose now. Stay or leave with us." Now that there were no more overlords in the form synthesis stage in the Mezu, the strongest one left was Jesse. If Bela and Karo stayed, it wouldn't be difficult for them to regain control of the Mezu. However, if they chose to leave together, they might not have the chance to return to the Mezu in the future. This wasn't Knight Serenity's decision, but Chinchuan's. Now, he was giving Bela a chance to choose. After hearing Knight Serenity's words, Bela fell silent. In the current Mezu, apart from her teacher Jesse, she didn't have any feelings for anyone else. However, no matter what, this was her former home. It was really difficult for her to completely cut off all ties with it. However, if it weren't for Chinchuan, she might still be Ock's plaything. Karo would probably have met with misfortune, Jesse would still be guarding the teleportation array, and Iacos would still be at large. She wanted to regain her freedom and take revenge, but it was still far away. Therefore, she wanted to repay Chinchuan and stay by Chinchuan's side to work for him. Bela, go. At this moment, Karo came to Bela's side and reached out to hold Bela's hand. Her expression was complicated, but also very gentle. Bela looked at Karo, pursed her lips, and didn't say anything. Karo looked at Bela and said, "I know you. I've known you since you were young. You're a person with a greater future. You shouldn't be tied down by these things in the Mezu. Don't worry, I'll stay and rebuild our home with teacher Jesse." After hearing Karo's words, Bela whispered, "Sister, I'm sorry. I shouldn't let you bear these things alone. I'm your elder sister, so there's nothing wrong with letting me take responsibility for these things." Karo gently stroked Bela's blue hair and whispered, "Go. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't miss it." Jesse walked over and said to Bela, "Go. We'll always be proud of you." After hearing Jesse's words, Bela finally made up her mind. She said to Karo and Jesse, "Sister, teacher, I'll definitely come back." On the spaceship, when he saw Bela again, Chinchuan could clearly feel that Bela was completely different from before. In his first impression, Bela was a girl whose pride and dignity had been destroyed. She had become weak and self-abased. But now, after Auk and Iacos had been torn apart, Bela had become strong and powerful again. The pain of the past had now turned into strength in her body. "Thank you, sir." Bela looked at Chinchuan firmly. "I'm willing to follow you and pledge my loyalty to you." Faced with Bela's attitude, Chinchuan smiled faintly and said, "You've made the right choice. Moreover, I can see that you're about to reach the form synthesis stage." Bela was naturally gifted. If it weren't for Iacos' sudden betrayal and Auk's covetousness, Bela should have already reached the form synthesis stage. After going through these hardships, Chinchuan believed that Bela would definitely become stronger than when she reached the form synthesis stage 100 years ago. Hearing Chinchuan's words, Bela nodded gently and said to Chinchuan, "I do have this feeling. The power in my body is gradually fusing, and my power of law is also fusing." The power of law that Bela mastered was the law of water, the same as Iacos. Chinchuan nodded and said to Knight Serenity, "Let's get out of here and find a more desolate place to let Bela break through." At Chinchuan's command, the spaceship moved slowly toward the other end of the universe. Although the battle on Mount Great Moon had alarmed many people, no one knew what had happened, and no one connected it to the events on planet Iron Tower. Everyone thought that these two events were of no importance, but some people actually connected the two events together. Northwest of the Sage Monarch continent, on a planet filled with huge caverns, a sharp screech suddenly erupted. A huge black figure rushed out of the caverns and opened its mouth, which was full of tiny teeth, and roared angrily. Whoosh! Dozens of figures rushed over from the distance and landed next to the black figure. They frowned and looked at it, but it was impossible to tell what they were thinking. Thousands of years have passed, and the devil bug has been waking up more and more frequently. It seems that something is making it very irritated and angry. A one-legged figure slowly walked to the edge of the cave, looking at the roaring devil bug with a slightly dignified gaze. Since the incident more than a decade ago, this was the third time the devil bug had awakened, and this awakening was far more irritating and disturbing than the previous 2 times. After the devil bug vented its anger, it slowly twisted its huge body and looked at the one-legged magistrate with its dozens of evil and ferocious eyes. It opened its mouth and let out an ear-piercing scream. After hearing the devil bug's scream, the one-legged magistrate couldn't help but frown slightly. He didn't expect the devil bug to wake up again for the same reason as the previous 2 times. Mr. Devil, are you saying that you can sense the aura of the guy who made you lose 2 apostles? The devil bug screeched again at the magistrate in response. I know what to do, Mr. Devil. This time, I won't let that guy escape. After being comforted by the one-legged consul, the demon worm slowly retreated into the cave. When the demon worm's aura disappeared, the one-legged consul turned to look at the people behind him and said indifferently, He's here. Your Excellency, who are you talking about? The one-legged consul sneered. It's that guy, the guy who killed 2 apostles of the devil bug in succession. I really didn't expect him to have the guts to appear in the Saint Star cluster. It seems like he doesn't know what he has done in the past. Your Excellency, what should we do? The one-legged consul did not speak. He was waiting. When a finger-sized devil bug jumped out of the cave and landed on his palm, he said to everyone, Follow the devil bug's avatar, find that person, and bring him back. Chapter 1178. 10 days later, the spaceship arrived at an extremely remote galaxy within the jurisdiction of the Great Lunar Nebula. Here, Qin and the others found a deserted planet where Bela would undergo her tribulation and advance to the form synthesis stage. During these 10 days, the power in Bela's body had completely integrated into one and could trigger the thunder tribulation at any time. If not, Qin would have wanted to fly further and go to a more remote place. Everyone stood in the air and looked at Bela in the distance. They were all looking forward to seeing Bela become the 3rd overlord in their team. However, in terms of combat strength, she might be ranked 5th. Qin, you don't have much time left. Lu Zi looked at Qin with worry in her eyes. According to Qin, he would not be able to continue suppressing the Lotus of the Void after 3 years. At that time, he would be eroded by the power of the Void and become a Void creature. Now, they had left the celestial cluster for several months. Qin had less than a year left. If Qin could not advance to the form synthesis stage in less than a year, it would be really troublesome. Hearing Lu Zi's words, Qin smiled and said, You don't have to worry about me. I know what I'm doing. Seeing that Qin was not worried at all, Lu Zi could not do anything. She could only hope that Bela's tribulation could give Qin some inspiration and let Qin gain something. Whoosh! The wind whistled and dark clouds gradually appeared. They gathered above Bela's head and turned into tribulation clouds. Large patches of tribulation clouds covered the sky, and almost half of the planet was shrouded in them. When thunder rolled in the tribulation clouds, everyone knew that Bela was about to begin her tribulation. Looking at the tribulation clouds in the sky, Qin was a little curious and asked, Do you think that the thunder tribulation, a natural force of heaven and earth, is also a kind of power of law? Is there anyone who can control it? Hearing Qin's words, Knight Serenity looked at Qin subtly and said, If there is, you may not be able to reach this stage in terms of the law of thunder. Qin looked at Knight Serenity and said, Do you think my law of thunder and the tribulation clouds we are seeing now are the same kind of power of law? Knight Serenity asked in return, Is it not? Chuan heard Knight Serenity's words and looked at Argentin and asked, "What do you think?" Argentin pondered for a moment and replied, "I think they should be the same, but not exactly the same. To be specific, they should be two different branches. Above them, there should be an origin?" Hearing Argentin's words, Chuan couldn't help but fall into deep thought. If the law of thunder was a branch of a certain law domain, then what kind of power of law would this origin be? Chuan's thoughts were quickly interrupted because Bela's tribulation had arrived. The loud roar woke him up. For the well-prepared Bela, transcending the tribulation wasn't a very difficult thing. At least, the first 5 lightning tribulations didn't have any effect on Bela. As Bela's aura became stronger and stronger, everyone's worries about Bela also lessened. "It's already 6 lightning tribulations," Lu Zi said to Chuan. "From now on, with every lightning tribulation, Bela's potential will increase by a bit." Chuan nodded and said, "I really hope that Bela can transcend the mysterious Heaven 9 stage tribulation." Hearing Chuan's words, Lu Zi looked at Chuan helplessly. This guy really didn't forget to praise himself at all times. Speaking of which, Chuan did indeed have the qualifications to do so. Rumble. The 7th lightning tribulation fell, but the tribulation clouds showed no signs of dissipating. This made everyone regard Bela even more highly. Bela, who could transcend at least 8 lightning tribulations, had a very high chance of breaking through to the highest realm in the future, the tribulation passing stage. Under everyone's expectant gazes, the 8th lightning tribulation came as scheduled. However, what made everyone feel regretful was that after the 8th lightning tribulation, the tribulation clouds gradually dissipated. Although Bela's talent was high, she didn't attract the mysterious Heaven 9 stage tribulation. When the tribulation clouds completely dissipated, Bela looked up at the sky and couldn't help but cry out in excitement. She had been looking forward to this day for a long time. Now, she had finally transcended the lightning tribulation and reached the form synthesis stage. In Bela's original plan, after she reached the form synthesis stage, she planned to settle the score with Auk and then take revenge on Iakos. However, now that Auk and Iakos were dead, she had already taken her revenge. Therefore, what she wanted to do now was to protect Chuan and repay his kindness. Bela came back. She came to Chuan's side and looked at Chuan with excitement. She said, "Until now, I feel that I have the qualifications to be loyal to you." Although Chuan was only at the exceptional void stage, Bela had witnessed the battle between Chuan and Iakos. She knew very well that Chuan was a genius who couldn't be measured by common sense. The stronger she became, the deeper her reverence for Chuan in her heart. "Congratulations!" Chuan smiled and said to Bela, "I'm afraid that your movements here will attract some people's attention. Let's go back to the spaceship and leave this place first." Everyone followed Chuan's words and returned to the spaceship. At this time, Bela's optical computer suddenly received a video call request from Caro. When Bela accepted the video call request, she was surprised to find that the person on the other side was not Caro, but a mysterious person covered in a black shell. Warrior Zerg. Seeing this figure, Bela's expression suddenly became serious. She said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" "Who I am is not important. What's important is that your sister is in my hands. You don't want her to go to hell, right?" Zerg looked at Bela coldly and said, "I want to see that person." Bela knew that the person he was talking about must be Chuan. For Caro's safety, she should immediately go to Chuan. But now, she was hesitant. She was worried that this matter would drag Chuan into a whirlpool of trouble. She wanted to repay Chuan, not take revenge on Chuan. "What are you hesitating for?" Zerg snorted. "Even if you don't tell that person, I still have a way to contact him." Bela knew that Zerg was telling the truth. In the Holy Cluster, if Zerg wanted to investigate a person, that person would have nowhere to hide. It was impossible for her to help Qin Chuan hide from Zerg's investigation. I'll go find him. But first, I want to make sure that my sister is safe. Zerg did not have any objections. He dragged the tied-up Caro over and said to Bela, "Don't worry. As long as you do as I say, she will be safe." Chapter 1179. In the face of Zerg's threat, Bela finally found Qin Chuan. When Bela told Qin Chuan about the situation, she was surprised that she did not see any surprise or anger on Qin Chuan's face. "I knew this day would come. I've been waiting for it." Zerg's reaction is still a bit slow. When Qin Chuan decided to come to the Holy Cluster, he was already mentally prepared for his identity to be exposed and to be discovered by Zerg. Because in all of his plans, there was one of the most dangerous and crucial parts, and that was to make use of the threat posed by Zerg to once again tap into his own potential and use this life-or-death crisis to break through his current realm and reach the body fusion stage. And Zerg waited until now to discover him, which was indeed a bit slow and delayed his plan. Bela always knew that Qin Chuan did not have any good feelings towards Zerg, but she never thought that Qin Chuan was actually waiting for Zerg to discover him. At this moment, Bela was very curious. What kind of grudge did Qin Chuan have with Zerg? Qin Chuan took Bela's photon computer and sent a video call to Caro's photon computer. Soon, the call was connected, and the face of an unfamiliar Zerg warrior appeared in front of Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan did not reveal his real face. He wore a cloak and said to the Zerg warrior, "I heard that you're looking for me." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, the Zerg warrior frowned and said, "Take off your hood." Qin Chuan laughed and said, "You're not qualified to see my face. Find someone else to talk to." The Zerg warrior was furious and said to Qin Chuan, "You're looking for death." Qin Chuan sneered and said, "You think you can do anything to me just because you captured Caro?" The Zerg warrior was about to say something when he was pushed aside by another figure. It was a figure covered in a dark green shell. His face was rough and his eyes were fierce. He stared at Qin Chuan as if he was looking at prey. "I'm his commander, the deputy commander of the Holy Clan's Devil Army, Ink Ghost." Hearing Ink Ghost's words, Qin Chuan looked at Ink Ghost indifferently and did not say anything. Ink Ghost looked at Qin Chuan deeply and said, "You killed 2 of Mr. Devil's apostles. You must pay the price." Qin Chuan was stunned for a moment. He thought that his identity was exposed and that was why Zerg found him. But from what Ink Ghost said, it did not seem to be the case. As for apostles, he was even more confused. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." Qin Chuan decided to test Ink Ghost because it seemed to be a very interesting thing. Ink Ghost snorted and said, "You don't have to hide it. This matter can't be hidden. 14 years ago, you killed 2 of Mr. Devil's apostles. There can't be a mistake." Hearing Ink Ghost's words, Qin Chuan could not help but think of the black-robed man who died in his hands because of the rune stone, and the black-robed woman who released the Zerg king and almost destroyed the sane state. If he guessed correctly, these 2 people were the apostles of Mr. Devil that Ink Ghost mentioned. In other words, Ink Ghost did not know that he was Qin Chuan. He was a human. Seeing Qin Chuan fall silent, Ink Ghost thought that Qin Chuan had admitted it. He said, "You have nowhere to go now. In the Holy Cluster, your whereabouts have been completely tracked. If you go back to the Great Moon Mountain, you may still have a chance to live." Qin Chuan sighed and said to Ink Ghost, "I know. Before that, don't hurt my friends." After saying this, Qin Chuan did not give Ink Ghost a chance to continue speaking. He hung up the video call and turned off the optical computer. After doing all this, Qin Chuan looked up at everyone. Seeing their strange looks, he smiled and said, "Why are you looking at me?" Bela looked at Qin Chuan with a complicated expression and said in a low voice, "Actually, you don't have to go back. I believe that my sister won't blame you. If you didn't save us, my sister and I would be living a life worse than death." Chuan smiled and said to Bela, "You've misunderstood. I will go back, but not for your sister. I will go back because of Zerg." Others may not understand Chuan, but Lu Zi could understand Chuan. She heard the conversation just now and knew that Zerg did not recognize Chuan's true identity at all. He only looked for Chuan because of some other things. Therefore, Chuan wanted to go back and give Zerg a heavy blow. Although it was very refreshing to do this, it was also accompanied by a huge risk. "Chuan, are you sure you want to do this? When the time comes, you may not be able to hide it anymore." Lu Zi looked at Chuan and said, "But I respect all the decisions you make and will fully support you." Chuan turned his head and looked at Lu Zi and said softly, "This is a very good opportunity." This time, Chuan came to the Holy Cluster just to walk around and see the situation in the Holy Cluster. But when he learned the truth about the destruction of the city of Trump, what he wanted to do was no longer as simple as just looking around. He wanted to find an opportunity to teach Zerg a profound lesson. Now, this opportunity was in front of him. Zerg did not know his true identity. Even if he valued him, there was a limit. He could use this information gap to catch Zerg off guard. Before leaving the Holy Cluster, he would kill as many Zerg as he could. "You're too reckless." Bela looked at Chuan seriously. "The Holy Clans can close the interstellar portal at any time, and then they'll close the door and beat us up. Although I don't know what your identity is, we won't be able to hide it when the time comes. Don't think about these problems." At this moment, Night Serenity suddenly interrupted everyone's conversation. When Chuan turned his head and looked at Night Serenity said in a deep voice, "We're surrounded. Zerg is here." Zerg's spaceships gathered from all directions and surrounded the spaceship Chuan and the others were on. Thousands of Zerg soldiers were ready to charge. As the commander of this operation, Ink Ghost looked at the desperate spaceship and could not help but sneer. "Do you think I will obediently wait for you to come back at Mount Great Moon? How naive." From the beginning to the end, Ink Ghost did not think that he could use Caro to threaten Chuan to return to Mount Great Moon. The previous call was just to make sure that the target was still there. Ink Ghost stood up and said to the deputy beside him, "Send a message to the consul. We have surrounded the enemy and are ready to attack at any time. Please give instructions." Chapter 1180. Chuan turned on the spaceship's security system. Looking at the dozens of Zerg spaceships surrounding the spaceship, his expression turned serious. He realized that he had underestimated Zerg. Due to his carelessness, they had fallen into Zerg's encirclement. It looked like a big battle was inevitable. Everyone was looking at Chuan, waiting for Chuan to make a decision. Whether it was to fight or to break through, they would listen to Chuan. "Get ready for battle." Chuan slowly turned around and looked at the crowd. At this moment, he had already sorted out his emotions and appeared calm and composed. Lu Zi looked at Chuan and asked, "Are we going to defeat them head-on?" Chuan nodded and said to Lu Zi, "This is just Zerg's vanguard. They will have reinforcements later. There is no point in us breaking through now. It will only make the situation worse. Therefore, the best way is to defeat this Zerg's vanguard and then fight with Zerg's reinforcements." Hearing Chuan's words, Argentin was confused and asked, "How do you know this is just Zerg's vanguard?" This question was not only Argentin's question, but everyone else's as well. They wanted to know how Chuan knew this was just Zerg's vanguard. That Ink Ghost just introduced himself. He is only the vice commander of the demon officer. There must be a commander above him. Now that they are surrounding us but not attacking, there are only two possibilities. Either they are waiting for the commander to give the order to attack, or they are waiting for reinforcements to arrive. My guess is that they are waiting for the order to attack, and it is also true that they have reinforcements. Hearing Qinchuan's explanation, everyone's expression turned ugly. If what Qinchuan said was true, then it would be difficult for them to escape unscathed. Seeing the change in everyone's expression, Qinchuan smiled and said, "Of course, maybe my guess is wrong. But no matter what, we still have to fight Zerg before we can leave." Qinchuan did not give anyone a chance to speak and said, "Let's not waste time. Don't give Zerg the chance to prepare for Zerg. We will kill our way out and find Ink Ghost. Let's deal with him first." "Yes." Everyone roared in agreement, and their faces were filled with determination. Boom! The battle broke out without warning. Argenton rushed toward the left side of the insectoid ship. A silver light poured out and the entire insectoid ship melted in an instant. On the other side, Knight Serenity transformed into a first-generation sky dragon. He opened his mouth and spat out several dragon breaths, which landed accurately on the insectoid ship. Along with the explosion and burning of flames, screams could be heard one after another. Compared to Yakko's, Bela's attainments in the law of water were obviously higher. The power of her water explosion was also more powerful. When the entire insectoid ship exploded, it also affected the two surrounding insectoids, causing countless casualties. Qinchuan and Lu Zi did not take action. They stood in the air and watched Knight Serenity and the other two kill their way out. They were waiting for Ink Ghost to appear. Ink Ghost was very surprised. He did not expect Qinchuan and the others to have the courage to take the initiative in such a difficult situation. Moreover, it seemed that the results were quite good. At least, their encirclement had been broken and their losses were quite heavy. Pass down the order. Let Maruing, Lu Zi, and Hu Te attack. Following the demon's order, Maruing, Lu Zi, and Hu Te, the three mid-stage unification stage overlords, immediately attacked. They each rushed toward their chosen opponents and fought Knight Serenity and the other two. The destructive power caused by the battle of 6 unification stage overlords was extremely shocking. The other insectoid ships had to retreat to leave enough space for the battlefield. There entangled, Lu Zi turned to look at Qinchuan and asked, "What should we do?" Qinchuan smiled slightly and said to Lu Zi, "To catch bandits, first catch the king. Although Ink Ghost is not the real king, he's still a small one." While talking, Qinchuan had already rushed straight to the insectoid ship in the middle of the insectoid fleet. Just now, he clearly saw Maruing and the other two rush out from this insectoid ship. There was a high probability that Ink Ghost was also in this insectoid ship. When Qinchuan moved, the demon, who had been paying attention to his every move, couldn't help but sneer. He admired Qinchuan's courage, but at the same time, he liked such a stupid opponent. Let Yi Gu and Yi Nu stop these two little guys. Remember, don't kill them. Yi Gu and Yi Nu attacked together and went straight to Qinchuan and Lu Zi. Facing the attack of these two mid-stage unification stage overlords, Qinchuan didn't have any intention of retreating. He didn't even have the thought of fighting back. When a hazy purple light poured down and enveloped Yi Gu and Yi Nu, the two's movements immediately became sluggish, and a trace of confusion appeared in their eyes. Qinchuan seized this momentary opportunity and rushed straight over. Leifa shot out from his left and right hands, directly blowing up Yi Gu and Yi Nu's heads. Accompanied by a series of explosions, the two mid-stage unification stage overlords fell. This scene was witnessed by many Zerg warriors. This short exchange of blows shocked every Zerg warrior. Even Ink Ghost was stunned. Ink Ghost thought that sending out two mid-stage unification stage overlords to deal with these two little guys at the peak of the insightful void stage was already a sign of how important they were. But now it seemed that he was wrong. In fact, he was even ridiculously wrong. He had seriously underestimated Qinchuan and Lu Zi's combat strength. There's something wrong with that purple light released by that woman. There's also something wrong with that lightning in that guy's hand. It's too lethal. Ink Ghost saw the problem, so this time, he sent out the remaining 3 mid-stage unification stage overlords to deal with Qinchuan and Lu Zi separately. He himself was going to personally take care of the situation and attack at any time. When he saw Ink Ghost leading the 3 of them out of the insectoid ship, Qinchuan transmitted his voice to Lu Zi. "They're out in full force. Get ready." Lu Zi nodded slightly and replied, "I understand." As she spoke, Lu Zi poured all her strength into the purple star divine eyes above her head. The purple star divine eyes immediately emitted an extremely dazzling light, dyeing the dark universe a faint purple. "This is—" Ink Ghost looked at the branch that suddenly grew out of his shoulder. It was a budding purple flower, and he couldn't help but reveal a look of horror on his face. By the time he realized that something was wrong and wanted to break the branch, it was already too late. "Meng Manji!" As Lu Zi shouted softly, all the people who were enveloped by the purple light and had branches growing out of their bodies fell into a deep sleep. As long as the branches didn't wither and disappear, these people couldn't wake up. Chapter 1181. Whether it was Argentine, Knight Serenity, or Bela, they were all stunned by Lu Zi's move. Even Qinchuan, who had already communicated with Lu Zi, was shocked. He didn't expect Lu Zi's move to be so terrifying that it could make thousands of people fall into a deep sleep in an instant. Among them were several mid-stage combination overlords, and even Ink Ghost, who was a late-stage combination overlord. "Hurry up! I can't hold on for long." When Lu Zi's reminder sounded in everyone's ears, everyone woke up from their daze and attacked one after another. Argentine, Knight Serenity, and Knight Serenity almost instantly killed Maruing, Knight Serenity, and Knight Serenity. Qinchuan originally wanted to kill Ink Ghost, but the branches on Ink Ghost's body were very short, and they were withering at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Qinchuan didn't hesitate any longer. He directly attacked the 3 mid-stage body integration stage overlords closest to him. At the same time, he used his lightning technique to insta-kill the 3 of them. At the same time, he tried to use his space-piercing technique on Mo-Gue. Unfortunately, Ink Ghost was completely awake at this time and dodged the attack. Mo-Gue stood in his original spot, looking at the 3 subordinates that had died at Qinchuan's hands. His expression was extremely dark. He had never imagined that the battle that he had personally led with 8 mid-stage body integration overlords to encircle Qinchuan's group, which should have been a surefire victory, would have such a huge mishap. Ink Ghost couldn't help but look at Lu Zi, whose aura had become very weak, and said in a deep voice, "I must kill you." Whoosh! A ghostly shadow flew out from Ink Ghost's hand and appeared in front of Lu Zi almost instantly. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced on Lu Zi. Lu Zi subconsciously took out her heavenly Luo umbrella to defend herself, but the ghostly shadow easily tore the umbrella apart and slammed into Lu Zi's body. When the ghostly shadow disappeared, Lu Zi's aura instantly became chaotic. Sometimes it was evil, sometimes it was normal. It was extremely strange. Qinchuan didn't expect this to happen. By the time he wanted to remedy the situation, it was already too late. This ghostly shadow is a pet that I have carefully cultivated for many years. It can devour people's flesh, essence, and soul. Your friend killed 8 of my subordinates, so she should pay a price. Ink Ghost sneered. His expression was extremely ferocious. He not only wanted Lu Zi to die, but he also wanted Qinchuan to die as well. Now he couldn't care less about orders. He only wanted to kill to vent the hatred in his heart. Hearing Ink Ghost's words, Qinchuan suddenly turned his head and looked at Ink Ghost. He wanted to kill Ink Ghost. As long as Ink Ghost died, he believed that the ghostly shadow would also die. Seeing Qinchuan rushing towards him, Ink Ghost sneered. He disdained Qinchuan's reckless behavior. Although Qinchuan had killed many of his subordinates, He didn't rely on Qinchuan's own strength. Instead, he relied on the dream created by Lu Zi. Now that he didn't have Lu Zi's help, he didn't think that Qinchuan could pose any threat to him. But soon, Ink Ghost realized that he was wrong again. Heavenly Light. Qinchuan didn't have time to fight with Ink Ghost. He used the first transformation of the Dragon Ball's 9 transformations, Heavenly Light. Then, a silvery white sword shadow crossed the sky and fell straight down. Heavenly Sword. After using Heavenly Light and Heavenly Sword in succession, Qinchuan used his powerful mental power to form a long needle and stabbed at Ink Ghost. He must kill him in one hit. Facing Qinchuan's continuous attacks, Ink Ghost's expression immediately became extremely shocked. He could resist the might of Heavenly Light, but it was difficult to resist the might of Heavenly Sword, not to mention the attack on the mental level. For a moment, he was exhausted from defending and couldn't find a chance to counterattack. And Qinchuan had already made up his mind to not give Ink Ghost a chance to counterattack. Whoosh! Qinchuan's figure flickered and cut through the sky. In an instant, he closed in on Ink Ghost. A ball of lightning flashed in his hand and pierced straight at Ink Ghost's head. Leifa Qianjun. Kung. Qinchuan's Leifa didn't hit Ink Ghost as he wished. Ink Ghost's body was wrapped in layers of shells that suddenly appeared like a round ball. Leifa bombarded it. Although he successfully repelled the round ball, he couldn't break it. Roar! The round ball that was repelled by Qinchuan suddenly turned into a huge Ink Ghost beetle that was comparable to an aircraft carrier. This was Ink Ghost's original body, and also his strongest form. You're very good. Ink Ghost's dozens of huge eyeballs stared at Qinchuan, his eyes full of anger. He didn't expect that he would be forced to reveal his original body by Qinchuan. Qinchuan also didn't expect Ink Ghost to be so difficult to deal with. His continuous attacks didn't have any effect at all. On the other side, Lu Zi's situation was getting worse and worse. It looked like she couldn't hold on any longer. Roar! Finally, Lu Zi couldn't take it anymore and turned into her dragon form. She turned into a dark purple illusory dragon. Her body that was hundreds of feet long meandered in the universe and roared continuously. Seeing this, Ink Ghost was stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes. What was he seeing? A real dragon? Argentin was stunned, Bela was stunned, and Knight Serenity was even more stunned. Knight Serenity had always known that Qinchuan had the bloodline of a real dragon, but this was the first time she knew that Lu Zi also had the bloodline of a real dragon. A real dragon? It's a real dragon! Ink Ghost suddenly shouted. He turned his eyes to Qinchuan and stared at Qinchuan. He said in a low voice, "Are you Qinchuan? That Qinchuan?" Hearing Ink Ghost suddenly shout his name, Qinchuan knew that his identity had been exposed. At this time, he couldn't care about anything else and directly took out the Flipping Sky Seal. Flipping Sky Seal. With Qinchuan's low roar, the Flipping Sky Seal shone and turned into a huge bronze square seal the size of a planet. It smashed down on Ink Ghost's head. Immediately, Ink Ghost screamed. However, he didn't die. He was tenaciously fighting against the Flipping Sky Seal. At this time, Qinchuan's strength was almost depleted by the Flipping Sky Seal. When he saw that Ink Ghost was still struggling, he gritted his teeth and took out the 10,000 Demons Seal. He activated the 10,000 Demons Seal with the bloodline of a real dragon. If one Flipping Sky Seal wasn't enough, he would add another 10,000 Demons Seal. He didn't believe that he couldn't kill Ink Ghost with this 10,000 Demons Seal. When Qinchuan roared again, the blood essence of 10,000 demons sealed in the 10,000 Demons Seal suddenly turned into the image of 10,000 demons. They made different hissing sounds and charged toward Ink Ghost. When the demon, who was struggling to resist the Flipping Sky Seal, saw the 10,000 demons coming, he suddenly lost his mind and became confused. He couldn't resist the attack of the Flipping Sky Seal and was severely suppressed by it. Under the attack of the 10,000 demons, he turned into a skeleton and died. With Ink Ghost's death, the ghost that was wreaking havoc in Lu Zi's body suddenly screamed and turned into ashes. Lu Zi had narrowly escaped death. Chapter 1182. Mo Gui died in a very aggrieved manner. This battle could be said to be the most aggrieved battle he had ever fought since he started cultivating. As soon as he appeared, he was forced into a deep sleep by Lu Zi's Mengmanji before he could even make a move. When he woke up, he discovered that all of his subordinates were dead. It wasn't easy for him to use the ghostly shadows to attack Lu Zi and regain some face. However, he didn't expect to infuriate Qinchuan. Not only was he attacked by the heavenly light and heavenly sword, but his spiritual world was also targeted by Qinchuan. If it wasn't for the shell protecting his body, Qinchuan's attack on Leifao would have made him suffer. When he revealed his true form and was about to unleash his invincible might, Lu Zi transformed into an illusory dragon and successfully attracted his attention. When he regained his senses, the cyclic sky seal had already descended. Before he could deal with the cyclic sky seal, the 10,000 demons seal had arrived. Wave after wave of attacks were relentless, not giving Mo Gui any chance to retaliate at all. If one were to calculate it carefully, the only time he had attacked LVZ with Phantom Shadow was when he had attacked her. After that, he had been beaten up passively. Even until his death, he did not have the chance to use his ultimate skill. For Qinchuan, this battle wasn't easy either. He didn't know how long Lu Zi could last under the attacks of the ghostly shadows. Therefore, he had to use almost all of his strength to end the battle quickly. Although he had reached the peak of the insightful Void Realm, and was much stronger than when he used the cyclic sky seal, the opponents he was facing now were many times stronger than before. This time, the cyclic sky seal had almost drained all of his strength. Similarly, the cyclic sky seal had almost drained all of his bloodline power. This caused Qinchuan's condition to plummet to an unprecedented low. It would be difficult for him to recover in a short period of time. However, Qinchuan was very happy. This was because they had killed Zerg's fleet, 8 mid-stage body integration stage overlords, and 1 late-stage body integration stage overlord. Even if Zerg was powerful, he would still be heartbroken by such a loss. Qinchuan, are you okay? Lu Zi, who had already transformed into her human form, came to Qinchuan's side and supported the pale-faced Qinchuan. Looking at Qinchuan's exhausted appearance, she felt very guilty. If she hadn't been careless and fallen for Ink Ghost's trick, Qinchuan wouldn't have become like this. After returning to the spaceship, Qinchuan immediately took a small recovery pill and a bottle of sky goat's milk to quickly recover his physical injuries and spiritual power. During this recovery process, Qinchuan was very surprised to find that when his spiritual power was recovering, his physical strength and spiritual power were also recovering at the same time. They faintly felt like they were about to fuse. This feeling, are they about to fuse? Qinchuan was surprised, but more than that, he was happy. Once he took this step, it meant that he was not far away from the body integration stage. While Qinchuan was carefully comprehending the process of fusing his powers, Knight Serenity and the others, who had finished off the remaining Zerg, returned to the spaceship. They saw Qinchuan, who was quietly recuperating, and also saw Lu Zi, who was sitting next to Qinchuan. Their gazes were very subtle. True dragons, a race that only existed in legends, they had seen it with their own eyes. Facing everyone's gaze, Lu Zi felt something. She opened her eyes and looked at Caro, who had just been rescued, and asked, "What happened?" Faced with Lu Zi's question, Caro replied with a bitter face, "Not long after you left, the teleportation portal of Mount Great Moon was suddenly activated. A group of Zerg people came. When Teacher Jesse and I heard the news and rushed over, they captured us without saying a word. We were powerless to resist. When they asked about you, Teacher Jessie and I chose to refuse to answer. However, they directly killed Teacher Jessie and obtained the answers they wanted by searching her soul. After that, they used my photon computer to contact Bela. Caro's answer was up to this point. Everyone understood what happened after that. Zerg had used some kind of method to lock onto their position and found their way here. Lucy was silent for a moment. Then, she asked, apart from these people who came today, who else is Zerg? There's also a one-legged guy, but he didn't come with us. Ink Ghost is his subordinate, Caro said to everyone. I'm guessing that one-legged guy is at least at the peak of the combination stage. When everyone heard Caro's words, their expressions became a little ugly. Ink Ghost was already so difficult to deal with. If that one-legged guy came looking for them, they would probably be in great danger. Subconsciously, everyone looked at Qinchuan, wanting to hear Qinchuan's opinion. Qinchuan needs time to recuperate. Let's not disturb him for the time being, Lu Zi said to everyone. We'll prepare to leave the Holy Cluster and return to the Celestial Cluster. Everyone nodded in agreement when they heard Lu Zi's words. In their current situation, if they encountered that one-legged guy, it was very likely that they would all be wiped out. It was better to leave the Holy Cluster as soon as possible. When everyone quieted down, they involuntarily looked at Qinchuan and Lu Zi again. From the performance of the previous battle, whether it was Qinchuan or Lu Zi, both had shocked them too much. In particular, the scene of Lu Zi transforming into a phantom dragon was something they would never forget. However, although everyone had a lot of questions in their hearts, they tactfully did not ask. Sometimes, too much curiosity was not a good thing. In the boundless universe, an insect ship was slowly moving forward. The one-legged figure sat in the command room, looking ahead indifferently. They're all dead. Not a single one survived. Even Ink Ghost is no exception. The one-legged man was surprised by the complete annihilation of the Vanguard team. Like Ink Ghost, he thought that this was a battle that they would definitely win. He did not expect such a huge reversal. How did a mid-stage unification stage and an early-stage unification stage do this? Even if the other three insightful emptiness stage cultivators have all advanced to the early-stage unification stage, they shouldn't have such powerful combat strength. Does this mean that there's someone behind them? The one-legged man thought a lot. He could not figure it out, but it did not matter. When he saw those people with his own eyes, some questions would naturally be answered. No one can leave the Holy Cluster unscathed after killing my subordinates, no matter who you are or where you come from. Chapter 1183. 3 days passed in a row. Qinchuan had been cultivating in silence. No one disturbed him, and no one would disturb him. During these 3 days the spaceship advanced steadily. They even replenished their energy on a trading planet. During this process they did not encounter any danger, which made everyone relax a little. At our current speed, it will take at least 20 days to reach the interstellar portal to leave the Holy Cluster. During these 20 days, anything can happen. We must be prepared. Qinchuan was cultivating, so the responsibility of making decisions was transferred to Lu Zi. No one objected to this. We don't know how strong that one-legged Zerg is, but since he's Ink Ghost's superior, he's definitely not weaker than Ink Ghost. I think he's at least at the pinnacle of the combination stage. We have no chance of winning against such an opponent. Lu Zi had a very clear understanding of everyone's strength. Argentine was at the mid-stage of the combination stage, and so was her actual combat strength. Knight Serenity was at the early stage of the combination stage, and her actual combat strength was equivalent to the mid-stage of the combination stage. Bela and Knight Serenity were in a similar situation. As for Lu Zi, she could feel that she had fused all her strength, but she was still a distance away from reaching the combination stage. Her actual combat strength was also equivalent to the mid-stage of the combination stage. In other words, Lu Zi's team, excluding Qin Chuan, had the combat strength of 4 mid-stage combination stage cultivators. Against an overlord who was suspected to be at the pinnacle of the combination stage, it was tantamount to a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Even if Qin Chuan recovered to his peak state, it would be difficult for them to deal with an overlord at the pinnacle of the combination stage. After all, Qin Chuan had already done his best to kill Ink Ghost. Even if he tried again, he would only be able to kill another opponent like Ink Ghost. It was basically impossible for him to kill an overlord at the pinnacle of the combination stage. Moreover, they couldn't expect Qin Chuan to risk his life every time they encountered a strong opponent. It's best if that one-legged Zerg doesn't come after us. If he does, Argentin, Bela, and I will stay here to buy time. Knight Serenity, you take Qin Chuan and leave. If you can't leave the holy cluster, find a remote place to hide. Grave expressions appeared on everyone's faces upon hearing Lu Zi's arrangements. Even if they did everything in their power, they might not be able to hold off a supreme being at the pinnacle of the body integration stage for very long. Even if Knight Serenity were to flee with Qin Chuan, they might not be able to get very far. To put it simply, this could be the last battle of one of them in their life. Lu Zi saw the grave expressions on everyone's faces. She smiled and said, "What I said just now was only the worst-case scenario. We haven't reached that point yet, so everyone can relax for the time being. Don't take it too seriously." Upon hearing Lu Zi's words, Knight Serenity said, "If such a thing really happens, I hope that you'll be the one to take Qin Chuan away, not me." Before Lu Zi could say anything, Knight Serenity continued, "I know that you chose to stay behind to stabilize the morale of the troops. However, you should know that we're not a bunch of loose sand. We all know you and Qin Chuan. We know that you're not the kind of people who would abandon your comrade. If you want to take revenge in the future, you and Qin Chuan will only have hope if you're alive." "That's what I think too." Bela looked at Lu Zi. "You and Qin Chuan leave. We'll stay behind." Argentin pursed her lips. "I hope that you can help me take care of the Yin clan. That's my only wish." Upon hearing everyone's words, Lu Zi could not help but show a look of gratitude. Just as she was about to say something, Caro, who was piloting the spaceship, suddenly exclaimed, "There's an insectoid in front of us." Upon hearing Caro's words, everyone immediately stopped talking. They quickly walked to the command deck and looked at the screen. On the screen, a black insectoid with a somewhat exaggerated design was quietly parked in the air, blocking their path. Just by looking at this insectoid, everyone could already guess that the one-legged Zerg must be in this insectoid, and it was coming for them. "Stop moving forward." Lu Zi immediately ordered them to stop moving forward. At a time like this, they could not continue moving forward. Just as Lu Zi ordered them to stop moving forward, a one-legged figure slowly flew out of the insectoid. His gaze traversed thousands of miles and landed on the warship that Qin Chuan and the others were in. His expression was calm and indifferent. "Kacha! Kacha!" Suddenly, the spaceship that Qin Chuan and the others were in made a sound as if it could not bear the weight anymore. It was as if it was being crushed, squeezed, and was about to be crushed into a ball by a huge force. Upon realizing this, everyone's expression changed drastically. Without hesitation, they made the decision to leave the spaceship. Knight Serenity directly broke through the airspace above the command deck. Argentin pierced through the spaceship and grabbed Qin Chuan, who was cultivating in the training room. Everyone rushed out of the spaceship together. Almost at the same time that everyone left the spaceship suddenly exploded. Everyone looked back at the spaceship that had already exploded behind them with lingering fear. If they had been any slower, they might have been buried in the explosion. The force of the spaceship's explosion naturally could not cause any harm to them, but the key was the external force that caused the spaceship to explode. Separated by thousands of miles, they did not see the one-legged figure move at all. Then, their spaceship exploded. Things are getting a little troublesome. Without a spaceship, we can only fly. Lucy looked at the one-legged figure in the distance with a serious expression. Then, she looked at Qin Chuan, who was still immersed in his cultivation. She was slightly anxious. Even such a violent explosion from the spaceship did not wake Qin Chuan up. Obviously, Qin Chuan would not wake up in a short period of time. Lucy, let's follow your plan. Argentin handed Qin Chuan over to Lucy. If Qin Chuan had not saved her back then, perhaps she would have been corroded by the power of the void and become a void creature. Now, it was time for her to return this life to Qin Chuan. On the other side, Knight Serenity and Bela were also ready for battle. As for Caro, she would not be of any use if she stayed, so she would leave with Lu Zi and Qin Chuan. Everyone, take care. Lu Zi gritted her teeth. She knew that saying anything more would only be a waste of time. Therefore, she resolutely turned around and prepared to leave with Qin Chuan. Chapter 1184. Where do you think you're going? A low and hoarse voice sounded in everyone's ears. Immediately afterward, a translucent cube appeared around everyone and enveloped them. Seeing this scene, everyone's expressions became extremely ugly. Argentin tried to attack this translucent cube, but her attack was like raindrops falling on water. Other than setting off a ripple, it did not have any effect on the translucent cube. We're trapped. Argentin came to a conclusion that was not really a conclusion. It was a little difficult to break this translucent cube with their strength. Trap. In other words, the worst-case scenario that everyone had previously prepared for was no longer the worst-case scenario. The current situation where no one could escape was the worst-case scenario. Puff! Knight Serenity opened his mouth and spat out a cloud of dragon breath, hoping to melt this translucent cube with dragon breath. Unfortunately, when the dragon breath touched this translucent cube, it melted in the blink of an eye as if it had encountered water. Don't make a meaningless struggle. One-Legged looked at everyone and said indifferently, I'll take you back and let the devil bug deal with you. Qin Chuan and the others had never heard of the name devil bug, but this did not prevent them from knowing that their current situation was very dangerous. However, they could also tell from One-Legged's words that they were temporarily safe. One-Legged raised his hand and waved gently. The translucent cube began to move toward the west, while One-Legged drove the insect ship behind. The scene looked extremely strange. What the hell is this? Is it the law of space? Bela frowned slightly as she looked at the translucent cube. She had never seen this method before. No one could answer Bela's question because no one knew what it was. In order not to anger One-Legged, they would not make a move unless they were absolutely sure or had no other choice. We can't just sit here and wait for death. We have to think of a way, Lucy frowned. If he brings us to Zerg's territory, we're really done for. While speaking, Lucy turned her head to look at Knight Serenity and asked, Did you feel anything special when you attacked with dragon breath just now? Knight Serenity shook his head and replied, The dragon breath was destroyed almost instantly. I didn't have time to feel anything at all. What about you? Knight Serenity looked at Argentin. Argentin had also attacked this translucent cube just now. Perhaps Argentin would feel something special. However, to everyone's disappointment, Argentin shook his head and said, Other than being sure that this is not something created by the law of space, I didn't gain anything. Although everyone had already expected such an outcome, they couldn't help but feel frustrated and despairing when faced with such a situation. They would rather fight One-Legged and be killed than be trapped in such a mysterious, translucent cube and be unable to do anything. No one liked this feeling of powerlessness. Maybe Qin Chuan will have a way. Bela looked at Qin Chuan, who was still immersed in cultivation, with a complicated expression. Our current situation is very bad. Why don't we wake him up? Everyone looked at Qin Chuan when they heard Bela's words. Although they knew very well that what Bela said might be their only way now, if they woke Qinchuan up like this, no one knew if it would cause any harm to Qinchuan. If it's not a last resort, I hope he can wake up on his own. Lu Zi shook her head and rejected Bela's suggestion. She knew Qinchuan well. She knew that Qinchuan couldn't be ignorant of the outside world. Since Qinchuan hadn't woken up, it meant that Qinchuan was now at a very critical stage. It was best not to disturb him. Lu Zi was right. Qinchuan was now at a very critical stage. He was trying to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space with his body. Once he succeeded, he would advance to the form synthesis stage. If he was forcibly woken up at this time, all his efforts would be in vain. It's too difficult. Qinchuan was very vexed right now. He had already fused his spiritual power, mental power, physical power, and other powers together and turned them into a brand new type of power, pure power. If he wanted to, he could go through the tribulation and become a weakest body integration stage overlord. However, Qinchuan's goal was obviously not to become the weakest overlord in the form synthesis stage. Therefore, he was trying to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space. If he wanted to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space, it might be a very easy task. However, if he wanted to fuse the law of lightning and the law of space at the same time, the difficulty would increase by dozens of times. At this time, Qinchuan was very clear that everyone was facing a great crisis. They needed him to come out and solve this crisis. However, if he couldn't advance to the form synthesis stage, he would also be helpless in the current predicament. If I still can't fuse the law of space at the last moment, I can only temporarily put down the law of space and fuse the law of lightning. Qinchuan had to prepare for the worst. Just as Qinchuan was thinking about this, the runic sword in his mind was absorbing and refining the runic stone obtained from Iacos. It had reached the final stage. As long as it absorbed the power of the runic stone, the damage of the runic sword would be healed to 60%. Once it succeeded, the power of the runic sword would no longer be reduced. The runic sword would activate the ability to self-repair and recover. It would go from a one-time deal to a sustainable development. Buzz. When the last bit of power of the runic stone was absorbed by the runic sword suddenly shone brightly. The wounds on the sword were healed little by little and disappeared. After a while, the runic sword returned to its original appearance, which was full of an ancient charm. At this moment, the void lotus on Qinchuan's chest seemed to have sensed the existence of the runic sword and suddenly began to struggle violently. It actually faintly showed signs of breaking through the seal of the nirvana true flame. Sensing the strange movements of the void lotus, Qinchuan was greatly alarmed. Originally, he was overjoyed that the runic swords had recovered most of their strength, but now they were instantly washed away. If the void lotus were to break through the seal of the nirvana flames, then it was extremely likely that he would be corroded by the power of the void. I don't care. Qinchuan gritted his teeth and decided to temporarily give up on fusing the law of space and fuse the law of lightning to advance to the form synthesis stage. Just as Qinchuan was about to do so, the nirvana true fire suddenly collapsed and the power of the void gushed out. Chapter 1185. Whoosh. Almost instantly, Qinchuan's figure was engulfed by the surging void energy. This sudden change shocked Lu Zi and the rest. They had no idea what had happened and what they should do. This is only Knight Serenity, who had accompanied Qinchuan to fight with Nkuan in the 99th district, saw some clues. However, she was still unsure. It had been less than 3 years, so there was no reason for the void lotus to suddenly erupt. Lu Zi looked anxiously at Qinchuan, who was completely engulfed by the void energy, and asked everyone, "What's wrong with him? Do any of you know what's going on?" Facing Lu Zi's question, everyone shook their heads. Although they could see that Qinchuan's current situation was not very good, other than Night Serenity, no one connected Qinchuan's current situation to the void energy. Night Serenity looked at Qinchuan hesitantly and said, "I think I know something." When everyone heard Night Serenity's words, they immediately turned their heads to Night Serenity. Lu Zi asked impatiently, "What's going on?" Night Serenity said in an extremely complicated tone, "Qinchuan's current state should be related to the void energy." When everyone heard Night Serenity mention the void energy, they could not help but be stunned. At this moment, they looked at the strange dark purple energy that completely engulfed Qinchuan. Wasn't that the void energy? Could it be that the void lotus has erupted in advance? In next to no time, LVZ guessed the cause and effect, and her expression instantly became extremely solemn. Because she was very clear that if Qinchuan was unable to endure this calamity, then it was extremely likely that he would be corroded by the void energy and transform into a void creature. However, what should they do now to help Qinchuan? Lu Zi had no clue, and the others also had no way to deal with it. Interesting, really interesting. At this moment, One Leg's voice suddenly rang in everyone's ears. Unknowingly, One Leg's figure appeared outside the translucent cube and was looking at Qinchuan with great interest. He seemed to be very surprised by the change in Qinchuan's body. One Leg was indeed very surprised. He did not expect Qinchuan to have the void energy sealed in his body, and it just so happened to erupt at this time. Perhaps after a while, Qinchuan would turn from Zerg's opponent to an ally. This was indeed a very interesting thing for One-Legged. At this time, no one was in the mood to care about One-Legged. They were all thinking about how to save Qinchuan. When everyone tried to extract the void energy, it was as if the void energy had taken root in Qinchuan's body and was completely unmoved. Just when everyone was worried about Qinchuan's situation, Qinchuan did not panic because he discovered a very strange thing. When the void energy suddenly surged out, Qinchuan was shocked. However, when the void energy came into contact with the law of thunder and the law of space and showed signs of fusing, Qinchuan was stunned. The void energy, the law of thunder, and the law of space actually fused together very harmoniously and naturally. Although the speed of this fusion was not fast, this was something that was really happening. Qinchuan completely did not understand what was going on, let alone whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. If the will of Nkuan that was contained in the void energy could be destroyed, then Qinchuan was almost certain that this was a good thing. When Qinchuan thought about this matter, the runic sword that had just recovered 60% of its peak power moved. When the tip of the runic sword pointed at the void energy and gently stabbed out, the will of Nkuan that had fused with the void energy was destroyed in an instant. The void energy that was supposed to corrode Qinchuan and turn him into a void creature had now become something like an adhesive. It glued the law of lightning and the law of space together. At the same time, it also had a neutralizing effect. It allowed the law of lightning and the law of space to perfectly merge together, even though they were originally unable to merge together. It was all-inclusive. This sudden and strange situation caused Qinchuan to be dumbstruck. He'd never imagined that the day would come when this supposedly lethal energy of the void would actually become the pushing force that helped him take the most difficult step. Boom! When the void energy, the law of thunder, and the law of space fused together and merged with the power in Qinchuan's body, an extremely terrifying pressure suddenly erupted from Qinchuan's body. It was as if a god had descended from the sky, causing people to involuntarily feel reverence from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, the void energy that completely enveloped Qinchuan's body slowly underwent some special changes. At first, it was a change in color, gradually turning from dark purple to dark blue. Then, it became blurry, as if the space was shattered and would collapse at any time. At the same time, Qinchuan's aura became even more vast and profound. When the dark clouds gathered and turned into a tribulation cloud, everyone realized that Qinchuan was about to undergo a tribulation. The fusion thunder tribulation. Previously, everyone was still worried that Qin Chuan would be swallowed by the void energy and turn into a void creature. Now, they were all stunned by this sudden turn of events. They had no idea whether this change in front of them was good or bad for Qin Chuan, nor did they know whether Qin Chuan would still be Qin Chuan after the tribulation. However, they knew very well that they were powerless to change what was happening in front of them. Everything could only be left to fate. Even the one-legged man was shocked by the scene in front of him. He frowned and looked at Qin Chuan, then looked up at the tribulation cloud in the sky. Then, he silently put away the translucent cube that trapped everyone. No matter what happened to Qin Chuan now, he had no reason to help Qin Chuan fight against the heavenly tribulation and get himself into trouble. Even with the one-legged man's strength at the peak of the combination realm, he did not dare to provoke the fusion thunder tribulation easily, let alone the others. In particular, Bela, who had just undergone a thunder tribulation, knew better than anyone how powerful and terrifying the fusion thunder tribulation was. The tribulation cloud condensed by Qin Chuan was obviously more powerful than hers. Rumble. When the thunderous roars erupted from the tribulation clouds, everyone had already retreated to a distance of 10,000 li. They were observing the situation at Qin Chuan's side from afar, praying in their hearts that Qin Chuan could survive this tribulation. Under everyone's expectant and uneasy gazes, the thunder tribulation descended. This thunder tribulation was not the ordinary blue thunder tribulation that everyone knew, nor was it the more powerful purple or black thunder tribulation. Instead, it was a golden thunder tribulation. A majestic, oppressive, and spectacular golden thunder tribulation. Chapter 1186. A golden lightning tribulation? Bela looked at the golden lightning tribulation that was as thick as the Milky Way descending from the tribulation clouds and couldn't help but be stunned. She had never seen anyone who could trigger a golden lightning tribulation. Could it be that the strongest lightning tribulation shouldn't be black? Bela didn't understand, but Lu Zi knew something. In this universe, only people like Qin Chuan who could trigger the 9 heavenly tribulations repeatedly could trigger a golden lightning tribulation. This represented the tempering of the will of heaven and earth towards Qin Chuan. At the same time, it was also a kind of recognition. This wasn't the first time Qin Chuan's lightning tribulation had a golden lightning tribulation. However, it was the first time that the first lightning tribulation was golden. In the past, no one had seen Qin Chuan's tribulation, but this didn't stop them from asking Lu Zi who knew about it. Faced with everyone's doubts, Lu Zi pursed her lips and said, Qin Chuan's tribulation is the 9 heavenly tribulations every time. Starting from the first tribulation to the gold core stage, the nascent soul stage, the spirit severing stage, and the insightful void stage were all 9 heavenly tribulations. Even the minor tribulations he underwent were all 9 heavenly tribulations, not the usual 3 or 6. When everyone heard Lu Zi's words, they were stunned. Starting from the first tribulation, every tribulation was the 9 heavenly tribulations. The 9 heavenly tribulations were the most powerful lightning tribulation. At the same time, it represented the deepest foundation and potential. It was already a blessing for ordinary people to trigger the 9 heavenly tribulations once and they could brag about it for the rest of their lives. However, Qin Chuan could trigger the 9 heavenly tribulations every single time as if it was a common occurrence. Just thinking about it made everyone feel terrified. How heaven-defying was Qin Chuan's talent to be able to reach such a level? They couldn't figure it out and didn't dare to imagine it. No wonder Qin Chuan is so powerful. He was able to challenge an overlord of the form synthesis stage when he was only at the Dongshu stage. I used to think that he relied on his endless trump cards, but now it seems that what he really relies on is his own strength. Knight Serenity couldn't help but recall the battle between Qin Chuan and Iacos. At that time, Qin Chuan didn't use any of his trump cards, and he was able to resist Yako's attack with his own strength. At that time, Qin Chuan's battle prowess was comparable to that of a mid-heaven integration stage overlord, but in reality, he was only at the peak of the insightful emptiness realm. Once again, Night Serenity recalled the battle between Qin Chuan and Ink Ghost. Qin Chuan didn't give Ink Ghost any chance to resist and killed Ink Ghost. Ink Ghost was a late heaven integration stage overlord. In other words, when Qin Chuan went all out, his battle prowess was comparable to that of a peak form synthesis stage overlord. These were the benefits that Qin Chuan received from overcoming the 9 heavenly tribulations. Night Serenity couldn't help but imagine how terrifying Qin Chuan's battle prowess would be after he overcame the 9 heavenly tribulations and advanced to the form synthesis stage. Perhaps he would be comparable to that of a peak form synthesis stage expert, or even he didn't dare to think about it. It was too inconceivable. Rumble. The golden 9 heavenly tribulations struck down on Qin Chuan's body again. With the power of the 9 heavenly tribulations, Qin Chuan's attainments in the law of lightning were raised by a level. Even in the face of this golden 9 heavenly tribulations, Qin Chuan felt like he could control them easily. Thus, Qin Chuan turned his gaze to the one-legged man, who was thousands of miles away. Qin Chuan felt that Du Lu looked familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere before. However, he couldn't remember where. However, this didn't stop Qin Chuan from confirming one thing. Du Lu was an enemy. Therefore, when the third 9 heavenly tribulations struck, Qin Chuan separated the destructive power and nurturing power contained in the 9 heavenly tribulations and directed the destructive power to Du Lu. This wasn't the first time Qin Chuan had done something like this. Therefore, it was easy for him to do it now. Under everyone's astonished gazes, after the golden 9 heavenly tribulations struck Qin Chuan, it turned around and headed straight for Du Lu. As if it was drifting, it left a dazzling golden trail in the air. Apart from Lu Zi, no one present had seen something like this before. As the person involved, Du Lu was even more stunned. When the dazzling golden 9 heavenly tribulations arrived in front of him, he suddenly came to his senses and realized that something was wrong. However, at this time, it was already too late for him to dodge. Rumble. The golden 9 heavenly tribulations struck Du Lu with an indomitable momentum. The pure destructive power wreaked havoc, making Du Lu feel as if he was undergoing a heavenly tribulation. Du Lu was a tough man. He gritted his teeth and withstood the attack of the golden 9 heavenly tribulations. However, 3 seconds later, he couldn't help but scream in pain. The destructive power of a 9 heavenly tribulations of this level was too terrifying. Even though Du Lu was an overlord at the pinnacle of the body integration stage, he still couldn't bear it. This, Argentin looked at Qin Chuan in astonishment, then looked at Du Lu. She felt a little dizzy. Why did the 9 heavenly tribulations suddenly change targets? Lu Zi, who understood the situation, smiled and said, "Lightning laws. This is an ability that Qin Chuan has mastered. He can control the 9 heavenly tribulations. I've seen Qin Chuan use this ability with my own eyes. There's no mistake." Everyone's eyes widened when they heard Lu Zi's words. There was actually such a thing? Just as everyone was still in shock, the 4th golden lightning tribulation arrived. Qin Chuan, as usual, left behind some of his nurturing force, sending the destructive force to Solitary Leg. At this time, Solitary Leg was still suffering from the torment of the 3rd golden lightning tribulation. He was completely powerless to resist the 4th golden lightning tribulation. Boom! Qin Chuan also gave the destructive power of the 5th 9 heavenly tribulations to Du Lu. However, when the 6th 9 heavenly tribulations fell, Qin Chuan chose to bear it alone. This was because there was too much nurturing power in his body, and he was about to explode. Therefore, he had to be tortured for a while to digest the nurturing power. Qin Chuan also thought about whether he should share the nurturing power with Lu Zi and the others in the distance. However, after thinking about it for a while, he gave up on this idea. It wasn't because he was stingy, but because he didn't know if this would cause the problem of his strength being insufficient after he advanced to the form synthesis stage. He also didn't know if Lu Zi and the others could withstand the nurturing power. It wouldn't be good if he overreached himself. For Qin Chuan, what he really needed to pay attention to was the 8th and 9th 9 heavenly tribulations. Only these 2 9 heavenly tribulations could truly threaten him. Therefore, when the 7th 9 heavenly tribulations fell, Qin Chuan's expression became serious as he prepared to face the 8th 9 heavenly tribulations. However, what surprised Qin Chuan was that there seemed to be a new change in the 9 heavenly tribulations clouds. A huge blurry human face appeared in the 9 heavenly tribulations clouds. Chapter 1187. When he saw the face, Qin Chuan was stunned. He thought he was hallucinating and his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, the face was real and not illusory. What is this? Qin Chuan was alarmed. He had never encountered such a thing. It was just too strange. Above the tribulation cloud, the face was blurry, but the pair of eyes were incomparably clear and bright. They were imposing without being angry, containing indifference, coldness, and even a little disdain and mockery. Qin Chuan never imagined that he could read so many emotions from such a pair of eyes. It was a kind of high and mighty existence that looked down on the insignificant. And that insignificant person was Qin Chuan himself. The 8th lightning tribulation fell. It was still a golden lightning tribulation, but the pressure was dozens of times more terrifying than the 7th lightning tribulation. The vast lightning nearly dyed the entire universe golden. Qin Chuan roared into the sky and involuntarily transformed into an azure thunder dragon. He used the body of a true dragon to resist the 8th lightning tribulation. The terrifying destructive power almost instantly destroyed the dragon's scales on Qin Chuan's dragon body, leaving him dripping with blood. The nurturing power followed closely behind the destructive power, repairing Qin Chuan's dragon body, causing the dragon scales to grow back. However, in just an instant, the newly grown dragon scales fell off again, and blood flowed out again. The extreme pain caused Qin Chuan's roars to become hysterical. The destructive power caused the dragon's scales to fall off again and again, causing blood to flow. The nurturing power repaired the wounds again and again, growing the dragon's scales. Although his body was fine, the extreme pain dealt a great blow to Qin Chuan's spiritual world. At one point, Qin Chuan was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. He gritted his dragon teeth and endured it. Finally, the destructive power of the lightning tribulation dissipated, and the nurturing power allowed Qin Chuan to recover once again. But even so, Qin Chuan's vitality was greatly damaged. He even felt a little lucky. If he had not transferred a portion of the destructive power to one-legged, leaving behind a large amount of excess nurturing power, he would never have been able to recover. However, after feeling lucky, Qin Chuan's heart was filled with anger. He looked up at the sky, and his golden dragon eyes met the pair of inhuman eyes. Unwillingness and stubbornness erupted. Qin Chuan knew that the 8th lightning tribulation should not have been so terrifying. It was all because of that face and that pair of eyes that caused him such pain. He was angry. The 8th lightning tribulation did not kill Qin Chuan, but there was still the 9th lightning tribulation. The tribulation clouds in the sky gathered towards the center, turning into 1,000 feet large ball. The power of the lightning tribulation was also gathered, and became even more powerful and powerful. The owner of that pair of eyes did not hide his killing intent towards Qin Chuan. He wanted to destroy Qin Chuan, an ant. At this moment, apart from Qin Chuan, no one else noticed the existence of that blurry face and those eyes. Everyone was looking at Qin Chuan with incomparable worry. The power of the 8th lightning tribulation had completely exceeded the limits of everyone's imagination. If they had been the ones facing that lightning tribulation, they might have been turned into ashes by now, but Qin Chuan had withstood it. However, there was still the 9th lightning tribulation. The 9th lightning tribulation would definitely be more terrifying than the 8th lightning tribulation. Qin Chuan will be fine, right? Bela was worried about Qin Chuan. Can the lightning tribulation be transferred to one-legged again? I don't know. At this time, Lu Zi was also in a mess. She did not know whether Qin Chuan could still transfer the lightning tribulation, but she could see that Qin Chuan's current state was very dangerous. This reminded her of the situation when she accompanied Qin Chuan to go through the Golden Core lightning tribulation. At that moment, she really thought that Qin Chuan was dead. Now that feeling came again. At this time, one-legged, who had been tortured by the lightning tribulation, had greatly damaged his vitality. His aura was weak and feeble. He looked at Qin Chuan with eyes full of shock and anger. He was doing his best to expel the destructive power in his body. As soon as his body regained its freedom, he would immediately run away from Qin Chuan without looking back. Cultivators were existences that defied the heavens. The rules of the universe could not completely restrict cultivators. It was like how sound could not be transmitted in the vacuum state of the universe, but cultivators could talk and converse in the universe. It was like the sound of thunder when the lightning tribulation fell. It should not have been heard by too many people, but more than half of the holy cluster was shocked. At that moment, countless people heard the sound of thunder coming from afar. Heaven, earth, and the universe trembled. All this time, Qin Chuan had thought that he was an extremely heaven-defying person. This was because no one could have had fortuitous encounters like him. No one could have the bloodline of a true dragon and the heart of a phoenix at the same time, and no one could ignore the strict boundaries of the realm like him, and fight people above their level as if it were a common occurrence. Similarly, Qin Chuan did not think that anyone would encounter such a blurry face and a pair of eyes during the tribulation. If one defied the heavens, there would be a day when one would fall into the hands of the heavens. Qin Chuan did not know what that face looked like, but he deeply engraved that pair of eyes in his mind. If he could meet that person one day, he would make that person pay the price for what happened today. But first, he had to survive the bombardment of the 9th lightning tribulation. Qin Chuan was very lucky because he was not fighting against the owner of that pair of eyes alone. He also rejoiced that he had obtained a huge runic stone before this, which had helped the runic sword recover most of its power. Otherwise, he really would have died today. When the runic sword rushed out of Qin Chuan's mind and stabbed into the tribulation cloud, piercing through the left eye of that blurry face, Qin Chuan clearly saw that blurry face suddenly become painful and fierce. It could no longer maintain that lofty and aloof appearance, and became much more vivid. He was laughing loudly. Although he could not kill you, he had to let you feel his pain. It was very refreshing. The blurry face was furious, but at the same time shocked. The appearance of the runic sword was unexpected to him. Just as he was about to do something, the runic sword cleaved apart the tribulation cloud. When the golden lightning gradually dissipated, Qin Chuan's dragon body had turned from blue to pure gold. In this desperate situation, his bloodline had transformed and evolved. At this moment, Qin Chuan was a real true dragon. 5-clawed golden dragon. At this moment, Qin Chuan had passed the combination thunder tribulation and officially reached the form synthesis stage. With this step, he directly crossed the early stage of the form synthesis stage and broke through to the middle stage of the form synthesis stage. Chapter 1188. After overcoming the difficult combination thunder tribulation, Qin Chuan couldn't help but have a question in his mind. Who on earth was that face and those eyes? Why did that person suddenly appear in his thunder tribulation and try to kill him? Qin Chuan was sure that he had never seen that person before. If he had seen that pair of eyes, he would have remembered them clearly. When Qin Chuan asked the rune sword couldn't answer Qin Chuan's question, because it had never seen that person before. Just like Qin Chuan, it was the first time for him to encounter such a situation. That person shouldn't be an ultimate existence. If he was, the rune sword's attack might not have worked, and I wouldn't have been able to survive. Therefore, that person should be a supreme existence at the crossing calamity stage. But supreme existences at the crossing calamity stage are rare in the universe. I have no enmity with him. Why would he target me? Could he be the Holy Emperor of Zerg? Just thinking about it, Qin Chuan shook his head and denied this idea. If it was really the Holy Emperor, he felt that things wouldn't be so simple. At the same time, Qin Chuan thought of another possibility. Maybe the owner of that pair of eyes, like him, integrated the law of thunder or the law of space when he advanced to the form synthesis stage. That person was likely to become a supreme existence. His appearance made that person feel threatened, so he wanted to take this opportunity to kill him. This was the most likely possibility that Qin Chuan could think of. Otherwise, he wouldn't have provoked a supreme existence at the crossing calamity stage. No matter who he is, since I've met him, he's my enemy. Qin Chuan had never thought about whether he could turn his enemy into a friend. Since that person wanted to kill him with the help of the thunder tribulation, he would fight back fiercely. The attack of the rune sword was just the beginning. Qin Chuan. Not far away, Luzi called out. Qin Chuan, who was thinking about something, saw Luzi flying over. He turned into his human form and appeared beside Luzi. Luzi looked at Qin Chuan's familiar face and asked uneasily, "Are you okay?" Although Qin Chuan had passed the thunder tribulation, Luzi wasn't sure if the person standing in front of her was still the Qin Chuan she was familiar with or not. Qin Chuan smiled. "Are you worried about the sudden eruption of the Void Lotus? Are you worried that I will be corroded?" Hearing Qin Chuan's words, LVZ knew that her worries were unnecessary. If Qin Chuan was really corrupted, it was absolutely impossible for him to say such words. At the same time, the others who came with Luzi also let out a long sigh of relief. Qin Chuan didn't hide his previous encounter. He told everyone about the sudden explosion of the Lotus of the Void and how he had used the power of the Void to fuse the law of thunder and the law of space. Everyone was stunned when they heard Qin Chuan's words. They never thought that the power of the Void could have such a miraculous effect. As the person involved, Qin Chuan also didn't expect this situation in advance. His luck had always been very good. The situation of your thunder tribulation just now was really frightening. Bela looked at Qin Chuan with an extremely complicated gaze and said, "You don't know, but at that moment I felt like the entire universe was trembling." Bela wasn't the only one who felt that way. Everyone present felt the same way. They didn't know that on a planet countless light years away, more than half of the people in the Holy Cluster felt the same way. If they were to find out about this, their current feelings would not be as simple as being shocked. This is the first time I've seen someone directly break through to the middle stage of the combination realm after transcending the thunder tribulation. Argentin looked at Qin Chuan and sighed with emotion. "You really are a person who is good at creating miracles. Alright, let's not talk about this for now. That guy is going to escape." Knight Serenity pointed at One-Legged in the distance. One-Legged had just expelled the destructive power from his body and was about to escape. Qin Chuan turned his head and looked at One-Legged, who was flying away. He waved his hand gently and a space door appeared in front of One-Legged. The next moment, One-Legged's figure passed through the space door and appeared in front of everyone. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned, including the One-Legged man. Qin Chuan smiled and said to everyone, "This is a new ability that I've just mastered after advancing to the combination realm. It's called the space travel technique. When everyone heard Qinchuan's words, they looked at Qinchuan strangely. They were all experienced and knowledgeable, but this was the first time they had seen someone who could use the power of the law of space to such an extent. As he spoke, Qinchuan looked at Knight Serenity and said with a smile, "You were the one who suggested that I integrate the law of space. It was also because of this that I could directly step into the middle stage of the combination realm and master the space travel technique." Qinchuan had the bloodline of the true dragon, so he had a unique advantage in comprehending the law of space. In addition, Qinchuan's bloodline had just undergone a metamorphosis, so his attainments in the law of space had reached a certain limit. If he took another step forward, he might be able to step onto the path of perfection. Because of this, Qinchuan suspected that the human face that appeared during his heavenly tribulation should have integrated the law of thunder. Otherwise, that human face shouldn't have been able to control the heavenly tribulation. "You've really become stronger and stronger." Lu Zi looked at Qinchuan and said, "The gap between us has suddenly become incomparably huge again." Qinchuan chuckled and reached out to gently rub Lu Zi's head. He said, "After you transcend the heavenly tribulation and advance to the combination realm, the gap between us will shrink again." After Qinchuan comforted Lu Zi, he looked at One-Legged. At this time, One-Legged was in a state of space imprisonment and was completely unable to escape from Qinchuan's control. This was the first time One-Legged had felt so powerless since he advanced to the combination realm. "I seem to remember where I've seen you before." Qinchuan looked at One-Legged and suddenly recalled what happened in the carefree secret realm in the land of exile. At that time, a Zerg senator had tried to come through the transmission channel, but Qinchuan had cut off one of his legs with the power of the rune sword. That Zerg senator should be the One-Legged in front of him. Qinchuan told everyone his deduction. Lu Zi also recalled what happened at that time. She looked at One-Legged in astonishment and said, "Are you sure this guy is that guy?" Qinchuan smiled when he heard this. He looked at One-Legged and saw the anger and resentment on One-Legged's face. He said, "From his expression, it should be him. However, shouldn't Zerg senators be at the nascent soul stage? Why is this guy only at the body integration stage?" Chapter 1189. Qinchuan remembered what happened in the carefree secret realm very clearly, because that was the first time he came into contact with Zerg and knew about Zerg's existence. Back then, the Zerg warrior had shouted "Lord Consul" to the descending One-Legged. He hadn't forgotten about that scene. Later on, when he faced the Crimson Army, he had faced 800 senators alone and killed them all. At that time, Qinchuan thought that the so-called senators were nascent soul stage cultivators of the Zerg race. Now, it seemed that wasn't the case. If Zerg's consul was really a nascent soul stage cultivator, then it didn't make sense for One-Legged to reach the body fusion stage in just over 10 years, unless One-Legged was a peerless genius like Qinchuan. However, from a practical point of view, that was obviously not the case. Therefore, there was only one possibility left, and that was that One-Legged had a fortuitous encounter. Bela, who knew a little about Zerg, glanced at One-Legged, then said to Qinchuan, "Consul is a kind of official title for Zerg. It's an official position, mainly for nascent soul stage cultivators. The role of a consul is to manage Zerg's people, including newborns, who aren't very powerful existences. Since this guy is called a consul, it means that he's a nascent soul stage cultivator, but in fact, he's a body fusion stage cultivator, which is very strange." Hearing Bela's explanation, Qinchuan raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at One-Legged with a subtle gaze. He said to everyone, "After hearing what you said, I suddenly found a problem. This guy doesn't seem to have fused with the power of law. It's really strange that a guy who hasn't fused with the power of law can cultivate to the peak of the body fusion stage. Not only that, He doesn't seem to have a special understanding of the space laws. Otherwise, he wouldn't have crashed into the space door you opened for him just now. Knight Serenity also voiced his opinion. This one-legged man didn't look like a body integration stage overlord at all. Although he did look very domineering and powerful when he first appeared, he was like a paper tiger. He looked very fierce, but in reality, he would break with a poke. Insu came to a sudden realization and said, "No wonder, he only used those translucent cubes to trap us and didn't try to kill me. So it turns out that he was actually just an embroidered pillow, nice to look at but useless." The more they thought about it, the more they felt that One-Leg's behavior was strange. He didn't seem like a peak body integration stage overlord at all. As for Qinchuan, who had interacted with the mysterious snake before, One-Legged looked like an idiot now. Luzi looked at One-Legged and then looked at Qinchuan. She asked curiously, "So, what's going on with him?" One-Legged did have a fortuitous encounter, and this fortuitous encounter was related to Qinchuan. In the past, One-Legged was just an ordinary Archon, responsible for teaching the newborns of the insectoids how to cultivate. His days were ordinary until one day, more than 10 years ago, he suddenly received an order to pass through the wormhole, which was the teleportation channel, and descend to the carefree secret realm. At that time, the order was issued very suddenly. One-Legged began his first descent through the wormhole without any preparation. It was this descent that caused him to lose a leg. His leg was cut off by Qinchuan, and Qinchuan gave away the leg meat to someone else. The carapace was made into Qinchuan's first battlesuit. One-Legged should not be blamed for the failure of his descent, but he was still angered. He was stripped of his position as Archon and exiled to a demon star as food for the demon bug. When the demon bug's huge body came out of the dark cave, One-Legged thought he was dead for sure. However, to his surprise, the demon bug did not eat him. Instead, it accepted him as an apostle, allowing him to rise to the sky in a single bound. From that moment on, One-Legged's fate was changed. He was no longer a Archon, but he took back the title of Archon with his identity as an apostle of the demon bug. He also made the Zerg Apotheosis stage cultivator, who vented his anger on him, pay a painful price. He gave up his former name and changed it to One-Legged, in order to remember the shame of the past. In the following 10 years, One-Legged never left the demon star again. He worshipped the demon bug and worked hard. Relying on the demon bug's rewards, he walked step by step from the Yuanying stage to the unification stage, and then to the peak of the unification stage. One-Legged used 10 years to walk the path that others could not finish in thousands of years. The realm accumulated like this naturally had huge flaws. For example, One-Legged knew almost nothing about the power of law. Another example was that One-Legged, who was at the peak of the unification stage, only had the combat power of the middle stage of the Dongshu stage. Therefore, One-Legged chose to use the power bestowed by the demon bug to crush the spaceship of Qinchuan and the others from thousands of miles away. When Knight Serenity and the others wanted to fight desperately, he used the translucent cube to seal them. By the way, the translucent cube also came from the demon bug. It was the saliva secreted by the demon bug. Every time the demon bug ate, it would flow out. One-Legged collected it and refined it into that appearance. It was very useful and very intimidating. It was worth mentioning that if it were not for the protection of the demon bug's saliva, One-Legged should have died under the thunder tribulation controlled by Qinchuan. This time, One-Legged originally wanted to bring everyone back and hand them over to the demon bug to deal with. However, he did not expect that Qinchuan would suddenly transcend the tribulation and ruin his plan. One-Legged, who had been trying his best to avoid a head-on confrontation with everyone, was exposed in the end. One-Legged had always remembered Qinchuan, remembered the person who cut off his leg and caused him to be exiled. However, He never thought that he would reunite with Qinchuan in such a special way, so he did not recognize Qinchuan at all. If Qinchuan did not take the initiative to mention it, he would still be in the dark. At this time, facing Qinchuan, the person who had harmed him again and again, One-Legged was furious. Today, even if he had to pay the price of his life, he would kill Qinchuan. Poochie. A black insect the length of an index finger crawled out of the one-legged man's mouth. It wriggled its fat body, opened its mouth, and bit down on the space imprisoning the one-legged man. It actually bit down on a piece of space. Seeing this scene, Qinchuan's expression suddenly changed. What is this? Just as Qinchuan was thinking of this, black bugs drilled out of One-Legged's nostrils, ears, arms, and even abdomen one after another. Every time a black zerg drilled out, One-Legged's aura would drop a little until he reached the nascent soul stage. The number of black bugs that drilled out of One-Legged's body reached 21. At this time, everyone had already understood that the source of One-Legged's power was these black bugs. You all have to die. One-Legged stared at Qinchuan and said the last sentence in his life, a curse. Chapter 1190. One-Legged was dead, but before he died, he left the 21 clones of the devil insects in his body to Qinchuan and the others. Looking at the devil insects gnawing at the confined space and about to break free, everyone's expression became extremely solemn. Obviously, no one thought that the 21 clones of the devil insects would be easy to deal with. These insects can gnaw on space. As far as I know, only devil insects have this ability. Bela said to everyone in a very serious tone. Devil insects are ancient strange insects that have existed since the beginning of the world. It is said that before Zerg occupied the Sage Monarch continent, devil insects were the masters of the continent. These insects eat everything and are immune to all attacks. Hearing Bela's words, everyone's expression suddenly became a little unsightly. If what Bela said was true, then wouldn't they have no way to deal with the 20 or so devil insects? I have also heard of the legends of devil insects. These shouldn't be the main bodies of devil insects, but clones, Argentin suddenly said to everyone. If they are clones, then it will be much easier to deal with them. Qinchuan immediately looked at Argentin and asked, Do you have any ideas? Argentin turned to look at Qinchuan and said, Let's run before they break free. Qinchuan, whoosh! Everyone listened to Argentin's idea, and took advantage of the fact that the 21 devil insect clones had not yet broken free from the confined space to run away as fast as they could. Originally, Qinchuan wanted to use the space travel technique to lead everyone to escape, but Bela and Argentin stopped him. The devil insects were extremely sensitive to the law of space. If Qinchuan used the space travel technique, it was very likely that it would attract the attention of the devil insect clones and they would be locked onto. In that case, the loss would outweigh the gain. After everyone flew tens of thousands of miles away as fast as they could, the 21 devil insect clones finally broke free from the confined space. They paused in the air for a moment, then quickly chased after Qinchuan and the others according to the orders left behind by One-Legged before he died. The devil insect clones flew very fast, like black lightning, and arrived behind Qinchuan and the others in the blink of an eye. Then, they suddenly accelerated and rushed toward Qinchuan. Seeing this, Qinchuan immediately used the space travel technique to send the 21 devil insect clones flying over tens of thousands of miles away. Qinchuan's forced decision made the devil insect clones excited. They loved the law of space the most. Crack, crack. Accompanied by the hair-raising sound of space shattering, the 21 devil insect clones bit through space and wriggled in front of Qinchuan and the others from tens of thousands of miles away, blocking their path. Seeing this scene, everyone's expressions became extremely gloomy. What should we do? We can't seem to get rid of them. Yiyu frowned as he looked at the devil insect avatar. He tried to spit out a ball of dragon breath at the devil insect avatar. When the blazing dragon breath touched the devil insect avatar, a ripple suddenly appeared. Then, the dragon breath disappeared, and the size of the devil insect avatar shrunk from the thickness of a finger to the thickness of 2 fingers. Obviously, the devil insect avatar had devoured the power of the dragon breath. Bela stopped Knight Serenity, who wanted to continue attacking, and said to Knight Serenity, "It's useless. Our attacks won't have any effect except to make these devil insect clones stronger. Are we just going to sit here and wait for death?" While Knight Serenity spoke, the devil insect clones had already emerged from space and shot toward Qinchuan. Qinchuan's figure flickered continuously, trying to distance himself from the devil insect clones, but he could not do so. As a last resort, Qinchuan used lightning escape and forcibly opened a distance. "Their target is me. Go." At this time, the 21 devil insects were chasing behind Qinchuan and did not attack anyone else. Obviously, Qinchuan was the main target of these devil insect clones. Before they devoured Qinchuan, they were not interested in others. Everyone saw that the 21 devil insect clones were chasing Qinchuan. While they were worried about Qinchuan, they did not know how to help him. When they heard that Qinchuan wanted them to go first, they looked at Qinchuan with conflicted gazes. They wanted to stay and help Qinchuan, but they did not know where to start. At this moment, Luzi had already made her own attempt. She activated the purple star divine pupil and used Dream Blossoms again. Dream Blossoms! With Luzi's soft shout, lavender flowers suddenly grew on the devil insect clones chasing Qinchuan. With the growth of the flowers, the speed of the devil insects rushing toward Qinchuan suddenly became much slower. However, they did not stop and still followed closely behind Qinchuan. "They're devouring dreams." Luzi was a little shocked. She did not expect the devil insect clones to be able to devour dreams. However, although the devil insect clones could devour dreams, as long as the flowers did not wither, they could not get rid of the dreams. At least for the time being, Qinchuan could breathe a sigh of relief and seize the time to find countermeasures. "Should we try to stuff these devil insect clones to death?" Knight Serenity suddenly proposed a bold idea. She did not believe that these devil insect clones could devour all kinds of powers without limit. There must be a limit, and once this limit was exceeded, the devil insect clones would most likely explode. However, Knight Serenity's proposal was opposed by everyone because no one was sure if this would have the opposite effect. They did not dare to gamble, and they could not afford to gamble. Just as everyone was thinking about countermeasures, the dream flowers growing on the devil insect clones gradually began to wither. It would not be long before these devil insect clones would leave the dreams and return to reality. At that time, they would still bite Qinchuan, and Dream Blossoms might not be able to trap them. Seeing this scene, everyone's complexion became ugly, including Qinchuan. However, at this moment, a round figure suddenly drilled out from between Qinchuan's eyebrows. A pair of cute big eyes looked at the 21 devil insect avatars not far away. It was as if it had seen the most delicious meal in the world, sparkling brightly. Delicious! With a burst of tender cheers, the little armored dragon's fat body appeared in front of the devil insect avatars in a flash. It stretched out its chubby hands, hugged one of the devil insect avatars, and opened its mouth to bite it fiercely. Everyone's eyes widened when they saw the little armored dragon eating the devil insects. Even Qinchuan did not expect things to develop like this. Chapter 1191. What is this? Everyone was stunned when they saw the little armored dragon eating the devil insect avatars. They had just seen the little armored dragon come out from between Qinchuan's eyebrows. This is the little armored dragon. Don't worry. The person who spoke was Luzi. She had known about the existence of the little armored dragon a long time ago. Although she had not seen the little armored dragon for a long time and the little armored dragon had grown a lot, she still recognized it at a glance. This is Zerg's sacred armor king, right? How can Qinchuan have such a thing? Bela had seen the sacred armor king before, but the little armored dragon seemed to be different from the other sacred armor kings she had seen before. Qinchuan pursed his lips and said to everyone, "The little armored dragon is indeed the sacred armor king, but it is different from the other sacred armor kings. It is a mutated existence." When everyone heard Qinchuan's words, they believed Qinchuan's explanation. However, they had never heard of the sacred armor king having the ability to devour devil insect avatars. Logically speaking, the devil insect should be above the sacred armor king in level. Can it do it? Knight Serenity glanced at the cute little armored dragon worriedly. At this time, the little armored dragon was still devouring the first devil insect avatar, and seemed to be struggling. Knight Serenity's question was also the question in everyone's mind. They did not want the little armored dragon to be devoured by the devil insect avatars that had left the dream. After all, there were 21 devil insect avatars. We can only choose to believe it. Qinchuan glanced at the little armored dragon with a subtle gaze. Ever since he met the little armored dragon, it had never lost in terms of eating. Qinchuan believed that the little armored dragon would not let him down this time. At this time, the dream flowers growing on the 21 devil insect avatars had completely withered. The 21 devil insect avatars left the dream and returned to reality. They should have continued to pursue Qinchuan, but because of the unexpected appearance of the little armored dragon, the 21 devil insect avatars immediately went crazy. The 21 devil insect avatars, which were already extremely aggressive, erupted with great hostility when facing the little armored dragon. They pounced on the little armored dragon, instantly crawled all over the little armored dragon's body, and began to crazily bite the shell of the little armored dragon. The devil insect avatar in the little armored dragon's mouth struggled violently, not wanting to be swallowed by the little armored dragon so easily. In the distance, everyone's eyes were filled with worry as they watched the little armored dragon and the devil bug avatar biting each other. The little armored dragon was furious. He did not expect that the half-eaten devil bug avatar would still be so fierce. He immediately opened his mouth and swallowed the small half of the devil bug avatar into his stomach. Awoo! After swallowing the small half of the devil bug avatar, the little armored dragon immediately reached out and tore off another devil bug avatar from his shoulder, opened his mouth, and bit off the head of the devil bug avatar. Fortunately, the devil bug avatar was an energy creature. Otherwise, the little armored dragon's bite would have splashed blood and mucus all over his body. The little armored dragon had achieved some results, and the devil bug avatar was no exception. The 7 or 8 devil bugs lying on the little armored dragon's abdomen were about to bite through the shell of the little armored dragon's abdomen. At that time, they could attack the little armored dragon's abdomen, and the little armored dragon would be in danger. Just as everyone was worried that the devil bugs would break through the shell of the little armored dragon, the little armored dragon suddenly spun on the spot like a top. The devil bug avatars desperately wanted to catch the little armored dragon, but the little armored dragon threw them away with brute force. During this process, the little armored dragon had already stuffed the second devil bug avatar into his stomach. Whoosh! The 19 devil bug avatars that were thrown away once again rushed angrily at the little armored dragon and fought endlessly with the little armored dragon. However, as the little armored dragon devoured their companions one after another, they could no longer pose the slightest threat to the little armored dragon. They could only bare their fangs and brandish their claws to express their anger and unwillingness before finally being swallowed into the little armored dragon's stomach. In less than 20 minutes, the little armored dragon had devoured all 21 devil bug avatars. When the little armored dragon patted its belly and burped in satisfaction, Half of the devil bug unwillingly wanted to get out of the little armored dragon's mouth, but the little armored dragon pressed it back in. Seeing this scene, everyone did not know whether to say that the little armored dragon was cute or ferocious. It looked so stupid and cute, but it did things so ferociously. The crisis is probably over. Everyone looked at the little armored dragon, who was trying to digest the devil bug avatars with its mouth closed, and they looked at each other. No one knew what the current situation was. When it was almost done digesting, the little armored dragon flew to Qinchuan's side and then crawled into Qinchuan's brain with its butt sticking out. At this time, Qinchuan also realized that the threat posed by the devil bug had been resolved by the little armored dragon. "We are safe." After hearing Qinchuan's words, the expressions on everyone's faces immediately became relaxed. The resolution of the crisis was a good thing for each of them. Since the crisis has been resolved, let's leave the holy cluster and return to the celestial cluster as soon as possible. Luzi looked at Qinchuan and made her suggestion. No one knew if the death of the devil bug avatars would attract the main body of the devil bug, so it was better to leave here as soon as possible. Qinchuan nodded. He also felt that this place was dangerous and should not stay for long, so he said to everyone, "I will use space travel to take everyone out of here quickly." Northwest of the Sage Monarch continent, the Devil Planet. Hiss. Accompanied by a sharp hiss, the huge devil bug roared and rushed out of the cave. Its eyes were extremely cruel as it looked into the distance, as if something had happened in that direction that made it angry. In the past, when the devil bug roared, people would always come to investigate the situation, but this time, no one cared about the devil bug, because everyone on the devil planet had been transferred away by one-legged, and all of them had died at the hands of Qinchuan and the others. No one could calm the devil bug's irritable mood. In its rage, the devil bug opened its bloody mouth and viciously bit the space in front of it, and then its huge body suddenly burrowed into the broken space. However, soon, the devil bug's unwilling roar came from the broken space. The distance was too far, and it could not catch up with Qinchuan and the others. It could only watch as Qinchuan and the others used space travel to quickly leave the holy cluster through the interstellar transportation gate. Roar. The devil bug retreated to the devil planet and roared. Its body suddenly swelled, and it was about to burst the devil planet. Finally, the devil bug's abnormal behavior attracted the attention of Zerg on the Sage Monarch continent. Chapter 1192. Messy Rock Star. Qinchuan and the others were sitting in a private room in a restaurant. Everyone's face was full of smiles. They had caused a huge wave in the holy cluster and escaped unscathed. This was something worth celebrating. Our trip to the holy cluster has been successfully completed. Now it's time for us to go back. When Qinchuan said this, his eyes were mainly focused on Bela and Caro. Knight Serenity and Argentine were naturally going to leave with them, but Bela and Caro had completed their mission. If Bela and Caro wanted to leave, Qinchuan would not stop them. Facing Qinchuan's gaze, Bela and Caro understood what Qinchuan meant. The two sisters looked at each other and then said to Qinchuan, "Sir, we are willing to follow in your footsteps." Hearing Bela and Caro's words, Qinchuan did not immediately agree. Instead, he said to them seriously, "I can tell you the truth. If you want to follow me, you will definitely encounter greater danger in the future. It will definitely not be easier than before. With Bela's current strength, you can live a stable life anywhere you want. There is no need to follow me just to repay my kindness." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Bela said very seriously, "Sir, we have already made the decision long ago. We are willing to follow you. Please don't drive us away." Caro also nodded and said to Qinchuan, "We will follow you not only to repay your kindness." Seeing Bela and Caro's resolute attitude, Qinchuan said, In that case, you two can temporarily follow Lil Z. After settling the matter with Karo and Bela, Qinchuan looked at everyone and said, "Today, I want to have a frank talk with everyone." Hearing Qinchuan's words, everyone's expression became a little serious. They all knew very well that what Qinchuan was going to say next must be very important. "First of all, you have seen before that Lil Z and I both have the bloodline of the true dragon. In the previous battle, Qinchuan and Lu Zi had both transformed into their dragon forms and were seen by everyone. This was something that could no longer be hidden. In that case, he might as well be frank and open." When everyone heard Qinchuan's words, the expression on their faces became a little subtle. Their eyes could not help but switch back and forth between Qinchuan and Lu Zi. To be honest, except for Knight Serenity, who already knew some things, the others were shocked by Qinchuan and Lu Zi's sudden transformation into their dragon forms. The true dragon that existed in the legends suddenly appeared in front of them one day. The impact was really too great. They had always been curious about whether Qinchuan and Lu Zi were the legendary dragon clan, but they had never had the opportunity to ask this question. Now that Qinchuan took the initiative to talk about it, their curiosity was finally satisfied. "However, Lil Z and I are not pure dragon clan. Logically speaking, Lil Z and I should be human." It was not easy for everyone to accept the fact that Qinchuan and Lu Zi had the bloodline of the true dragon. They thought that Qinchuan and Lu Zi were the legendary dragon clan, but no one expected that Qinchuan and Lu Zi were actually human. Human? Even Knight Serenity was stunned. Qinchuan and Lu Zi were actually human? Human with the bloodline of the true dragon? Everyone looked at Qinchuan in a daze. How did they suddenly become human? Facing the confused crowd, Qinchuan smiled and said, "It's a long story. I'll make it short. Lil Z and I both obtained the bloodline of the true dragon by some chance, so we have the ability to transform into a dragon. But in fact, we are both human." Hearing Qinchuan's explanation, everyone was still confused. Whether it was the human clan or the dragon clan, they were all races that existed in legends. They had never heard of a human with the bloodline of the true dragon. Now, such people had appeared, and there were two of them sitting in front of them. It was really difficult for them to accept it for a while. The human clan and the demon clan have disappeared from the universe for a long time, but the human clan and the demon clan have not perished. Instead, they are recuperating in a secret place. What I'm going to do next is to lead the human clan and the demon clan back to the universe. This has always been my wish. I didn't have the ability to realize it in the past, but it's different now. I've reached the form synthesis stage and have enough strength to protect them. So, I want to bring them back." Speaking of this, Qinchuan paused for a moment and then said to everyone, "This is a very risky thing. If some supreme existence of the crossing calamity stage or even the ultimate existence wants to attack me, it will be very difficult for me to resist. If you continue to stay by my side, you will also be implicated. So, I'll give you a choice now. Stay or leave." Qinchuan chose to tell them this after careful consideration. Now, the existence of the land of exile was something that could no longer be concealed. In addition, he was now strong enough to protect the human clan and the demon clan. So, he decided to lead the human clan and the demon clan back to the universe. However, no matter how strong Qinchuan was, he was still only a mid-form synthesis stage overlord. Perhaps no one in the form synthesis stage was a match for him, but if a supreme existence of the crossing calamity stage or even the ultimate existence wanted to attack the human clan and the demon clan, there was nothing he could do. Hearing Qinchuan's words, Lu Zi frowned slightly and said, "Are we going to return now? Isn't it too early?" Qinchuan shook his head and said to Lu Zi, "It's not early, it's really not early. Zerg has always been eyeing the land of exile. He has always wanted to conquer the land of exile and destroy the human clan and the demon clan. In order to find me, he was willing to destroy the entire Trong city. No one knows what he will do in the future. The land of exile's special laws of heaven and earth can protect the two races for a while, but at the same time, it will also limit the development of the two races. If we stay in the land of exile, the two races will never have the chance to rise again. Qin Chuan paused for a moment before continuing. Moreover, we caused quite a commotion in the holy cluster this time. It's impossible to hide from Zerg. They may be able to lock onto us soon and respond. We have to bring the two races out before Zerg makes his move. Qin Chuan looked deeply at Lu Zi and said in a deep voice, "Only by walking out of the land of exile can we see hope and see the road ahead. This road can't be paved by just me and you alone. We need more people to step forward to flatten this road. We can't protect them for their entire lives." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.